Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into a damp and wind-brushed island where the ground remembers hoofbeats, where salt hangs in the air from the narrow sea, and where a kingdom has just been turned upside down. What does it feel like when one battle changes nearly everything, but breakfast still needs cooking, sheep still need tending, and somebody still has to sweep the rushes from the floor? You're about to find out. You will walk through smoky halls, muddy roads, and fields cold with morning dew. You will meet stern lords, anxious villagers, monks with ink-stained fingers, and servants carrying trenchers through draughty rooms. Some of the grand stories sound heroic from a distance. Up close, they smell more like wet wool and horse. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are there, comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights and let yourself drift into medieval England, where the night is long, the bells are distant, and history begins under a grey sky. You arrive in England in the years after 1066 when the air still feels unsettled, as if the land itself is holding a careful breath. The roads are rough tracks of churned mud. The forests seem thicker than they do in modern imagination. Villagers huddle low against the weather, their houses made from timber, clay, and thatch, with smoke slipping through roofs instead of polite chimneys. Nothing looks polished. Nothing feels secure. The first thing you notice is sound. Crows call from bare branches. A dog barks somewhere beyond a fence made from woven hazel. Axes strike wood with patient rhythm. Then, from farther away, you hear horses and the jingle of harness. Men on horseback always change the mood. Heads turn, voices soften. A child is pulled gently indoors. England has a new king now. William, later called the Conqueror, though that title probably sounds better if you are not the one being conquered. He has crossed from Normandy, defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings in October 1066 and taken the English crown. That much is the famous part. The less glamorous part is what conquest means on a cold Tuesday morning in a farming village. It means new taxes, unfamiliar accents, sharper hierarchy, and a steady sense that power now speaks French across the dinner table. You walk toward a settlement where a timber hall rises above smaller homes. The ground smells of damp straw and livestock. Pigs nose through muck. Chickens scuttle between feet. A woman shakes out a rough wool cloth, and the smell of lye soap drifts faintly in the chill air. Her hands are red from work. Everybody here works. Even children carry kindling, feed animals, or fetch water in pails heavy enough to make their shoulders ache. Inside one house, the warmth hits you first. It is not clean warmth. It is thick with peat smoke, body heat, and the scent of pottage simmering in an iron pot. The room is dim, because light is expensive and windows are small. A bench stands by the wall. Rushes cover the floor. The texture underfoot is uneven, springy in places, gritty in others. A baby sleeps wrapped in wool. An older man repairs a tool handle with slow, practiced fingers. Daily life goes on, because daily life always goes on. Yet the conquest presses into everything. Anglo-Saxon nobles have lost lands. Norman lords are taking control of estates. Old families are pushed aside. New men arrive with claims backed by horses, swords, and royal favour. Historians agree that the Norman takeover transformed the ruling class with startling speed. Within a generation, much of the top landholding elite in England had been replaced. That sounds neat and tidy in a textbook. Here, on the ground, it feels jagged. You hear two languages around you. Old English fills the village lanes, full of earthy sounds and familiar rhythms. Norman French moves through the manor and among the mounted men, clipped and confident. Latin belongs to the church, to records, prayers, and solemn authority. Words themselves are becoming little markers of rank. The peasant tends the cow, the lord eats the beef. It is one of those strange linguistic leftovers that will echo for centuries. The weather is restless. A low mist creeps over the fields in early morning, beading on your sleeves and cooling your skin. Then the clouds break, and a pale strip of sunlight falls across furrows where oxen pull a heavy plough. The soil turns in dark, wet ribbons. You can smell earth opened fresh, rich and cold. Medieval life is tied to seasons so tightly that time itself feels agricultural. Autumn means storing grain. Winter means conserving everything. Spring means labour returning in full force. Summer means hope and anxiety mixed together, because crops can save you or fail you with equal indifference. You follow a narrow path to the manor centre, where the Lord's Hall stands heavier and taller than the village homes. Timber beams are dark with smoke. Hides hang to dry. A guard watches without smiling. Inside, the hall is long, draughty, and busy. Servants move between trestle tables. Hounds sleep near the fire. Meat roasts, dripping fat into flames that hiss and spit. The smell is magnificent if you are hungry, and almost overwhelming if you're not. A noblewoman gives instructions with quiet firmness. A steward counts stores. Two men argue over rents and obligations. Feudal life, or something close to what later people call feudalism, is settling into place. Land is the engine of power. The king grants land to his followers. Those followers owe service, especially military service. Below them stand knights, officials, priests, free tenants, and peasants with very unequal degrees of freedom. Historians still argue about how neatly this system fits the word feudalism, because medieval reality loved complication more than tidy diagrams. Still, if you live here, the basic truth is plain enough. Somebody above you holds power over land, labour, and justice, and that somebody expects obedience. Outside the hall, a carpenter works on a wooden structure rising from a mound of earth. It is part of a castle, though in these early years many are made first of timber, not the dramatic grey stone most people picture. Norman castles appear across the landscape with unsettling speed. They are practical, symbolic, and deeply intimidating. A Motte and Bailey castle, with its raised mound, tower, ditch, and enclosed yard, tells everybody nearby exactly who is in charge now. The message is hard to miss. It is also hard to ignore when the castle literally overlooks your home. The hammering never seems to stop. Oak beams thud into place. Earth is dug and piled. Men strain with ropes. Horses snort clouds into the cold. Castles are not just military sites. They are statements made in wood and soil. They alter the skyline and the psychology of the countryside. You can feel it in your chest, that subtle knowledge that force is now housed nearby. Not all resistance vanishes at once. In the north and elsewhere, rebellions flare. Some English nobles resist. Some communities endure harsh retaliation. One of the darkest episodes comes in the harrying of the north, when William's forces devastate large areas after revolt. Chroniclers describe famine and ruin afterward. The exact scale remains debated by scholars, but nobody disputes the brutality. Medieval kings did not usually send carefully worded press releases. They sent messages made of fire. And yet, in another lane, life looks oddly ordinary. A boy chases a goose and loses. An elderly woman spreads herbs to dry. Someone mends a cloak with bone needle and linen thread. You catch the smell of onions, damp wool, wood smoke, and manure all at once, which is perhaps the most medieval perfume imaginable. A blacksmith raises his hammer, and each strike rings sharp in the cool air. Sparks leap like brief orange insects. His arms are powerful. His face is tired. Tools matter here more than grand speeches. Religion shapes the hours as strongly as weather does. Before long you hear a bell from a nearby church, not huge, not especially melodious, but persistent. The people pause. Some cross themselves. The church building is simple, perhaps still Anglo-Saxon in form, perhaps soon to be replaced or enlarged under Norman influence. The stone feels cold and slightly damp when you touch it. Beeswax candles add a faint sweetness to the air. Incense appears on special occasions, carrying an exotic smell from worlds far beyond the village. For most people, the church is not an abstract institution. It is the keeper of feast days, burial grounds, confession, memory, and meaning. A priest speaks Latin during the service, though the congregation does not follow every word. That is normal. Ritual itself carries power. Gesture matters. Sound matters. Repetition matters. The medieval world is full of things half understood and fully believed. In a corner, a painted figure of a saint looks down with solemn, chipped calm. Children fidget. Someone coughs. A draught creeps under the door. Holiness, like everything else, coexists with discomfort. You might expect medieval people to spend every waking second being grim, filthy, and doomed, because popular imagination enjoys exaggeration with almost athletic dedication. The truth is less theatrical. Life is hard, certainly. Food can be scarce. Illness is common. Power is unequal. But people laugh, flirt, gossip, complain, sing, and tell ridiculous stories. A surviving tradition even suggests that some monasteries and households kept odd little amusements, riddles, or jokes close at hand. Human beings remain stubbornly human, even when surrounded by mud. At the edge of the village, you come across a boundary marker where local memory meets legal order. Land disputes matter intensely. Who can graze animals where, who owes labour, who controls woodland, who can fish in a stream. All of this affects survival. Norman administrators begin recording property and obligation with increasing determination. That process will culminate in the Domesday Book of 1086, an enormous survey of landholdings and resources ordered by William. It is one of the great administrative achievements of the age, though you can imagine villagers seeing it less as a marvel and more as the royal government asking very nosy questions. A quirky detail lingers in local talk. Some people believe certain ancient mounds are haunted or inhabited by strange beings. England is full of older traces, Roman ruins, prehistoric earthworks, worn stones whose makers are forgotten. Medieval villagers often live among fragments of vanished worlds. A broken wall of Roman brick may become part of a church. An old road remains under the grass. People invent explanations, pass on tales, and fold a mystery into daily geography. Not every hill is just a hill after sunset. As evening approaches, the light changes quickly, the fields silver under a weak sky. Smoke from hearths flattens in the still air. You feel the temperature drop through your clothing. Supper is simple for most people. Bread if grain is held out. Pottage of peas or beans. Perhaps cheese. Perhaps ale safer than doubtful water. The texture of coarse bread is dense and a little sour. The ale is cloudy and mild, more comfort than celebration. Nobody here is waiting for a dessert menu. In the hall, candles flicker against timber. In the cottage, embers glow low. A mother hums to a child. Somewhere outside, an owl calls. Somewhere farther off, boots move on a path where no one likes to meet strangers at night. Darkness in medieval England is real darkness. It folds over the village completely. Without lamps enough to push it back, the world shrinks to firelight, shadows, and sound. You lie down near the warmth, on bedding stuffed with straw and covered in rough wool. The fabric scratches a little against your skin. The smoke lingers in your hair. The day has been full of labour, caution, and small observations. This is how a transformed kingdom feels at ground level. Not only crowns and battles, but wet roads, tax burdens, church bells, cooking pots, and the arrival of men who speak with foreign vowels and build their authority on raised earth and timber walls. England is becoming medieval in a new way before your eyes, though the people living it do not call it that. They simply wake, work, endure, and adapt. The Conquest is not only a story of kings. It is a story of villagers learning the names of new masters, of priests blessing old graves under new rule, of children growing up in a country whose language, law, and landscape are slowly changing around them, and tonight, under that vast dark sky, with the smell of peat, smoke, and rain still in the air, you rest in the middle of it. Morning arrives pale and chilly, with a thin wash of light spreading across a castle yard still damp from the night. You wake to the scrape of boots, the cluck of hens somewhere beyond a fence, and the steady thump of someone splitting wood before breakfast. The air smells of wet timber, old straw, and the faint sour note of ale spilled near the hall door. A curl of smoke rises from the kitchen fire and drifts low in the cold, as if even the smoke cannot quite be bothered to climb. You are standing now in the shadow of a Norman stronghold, and it looks less romantic than later paintings might suggest. It is sturdy, practical, and slightly rude, like a man who never says thank you, but always expects dinner. The mound is steep, the timber palisade sharp, and the ditch below it deep enough to remind everyone that power enjoys a good barrier. Men are already at work repairing a gate hinge, hauling supplies, and checking tack for the horses. Nothing about the place says comfort first. It says control. The castle dominates the countryside in more ways than height alone. From the top, a lord or his steward can look over fields, roads, woodland, and village roofs, measuring not beauty but obligation. Every strip of land means rent, labour, grain, or pasture. Every family means hands that can reap, dig, carry, mend, and serve. Land is not scenery here. It is arithmetic. You climb toward the bailey and feel the ground packed hard under your feet. The timber under your hand is rough, sticky in places with resin, and cold from the night air. Nearby, 2 guards joke in Norman French, laughing at something involving a mule, as a priest, and probably bad judgment. Their humour is relaxed because they carry spears and wear mail. Security has a way of improving the mood. Beneath their laughter, you hear the metal chime of links shifting with every movement. It is a small sound, but a constant one. Inside the enclosure, the lord's household is waking fully. A cook bends over a hearth, stirring a pot that sends up the heavy scent of onions and barley. A servant girl rushes past with a basket of trenchers. A clerk with ink on his fingers carries wax tablets and looks annoyed already, which feels correct for anyone responsible for accounts. Near the stables, a groom rubs down a horse whose breath hangs white in the air. The animal's coat is warm and smooth to the touch, its muscles twitching under the skin, impatient with human delay. Castles are not only places of war, they are engines of administration, storage, status, and intimidation. Grain is counted here, disputes are judged here, orders move outward from here like ripples from a stone dropped into water. Historians once liked to imagine the castle simply as a fortress planted in hostile land, but scholars now stress its wider role in ruling territory and organising life. It is a home, a courthouse, a warehouse, a symbol, and, when needed, a threat with walls. Below the castle, the village stretches in a pattern that seems casual, until you realise every path leads toward duty. The houses are small and close set, their walls made of wattle and daub, their roofs thick with thatch that smells sweet when dry and vaguely rotten when wet. You push open a low door and duck your head to enter. Instantly the world changes. The dimness wraps around you. Smoke clings to the rafters. A pot simmers near the central fire. The floor is beaten earth, cool and slightly gritty beneath your soles. A child sits on a stool plucking at wool. An old woman slices leeks with a knife sharp enough to command respect. This is where most people live. Far from royal ceremony and chivalric pose, a peasant household is crowded with bodies, tools, baskets, scraps of cloth, and perpetual tasks. Work begins early and ends when light fails, and sometimes even then not quite enough. Bread must be baked, water must be drawn, fences must be mended, animals must be fed, watched, and occasionally chased when they decide freedom is more interesting than obedience. Medieval life contains a great deal of practical disappointment. You follow a man to the fields, where strips of land run beside one another in long bands. The open field system shapes much of rural England. Instead of a neatly fenced private plots, many villagers farm scattered strips across large communal fields. It sounds inconvenient, and in many ways it is. Yet it also spreads risk, ties neighbours together, and reflects customs older than the Norman takeover. Oxen move slowly in a team, their hides steaming faintly in the cool morning. The plough cuts deep, turning earth dark and moist. The smell is rich and mineral, almost sweet in its own heavy way. The man guiding the plough wears coarse wool that rubs at the neck and wrists. His hands are thickened with callus. He pauses only to wipe his nose on his sleeve and shout at the animals with a mix of patience and insult. You sense no theatrical misery in him, only effort. Medieval peasants were not passive figures wandering around waiting for historians to describe them. They knew their land, their dues, their neighbours, and their chances. They bargained, resisted, adapted, and occasionally grumbled with tremendous skill. A woman nearby gathers brushwood and glances toward the wood's edge, measuring how much she can take without inviting trouble. Forest law in Norman England becomes one of those sharp little pressures that can turn daily survival into legal danger. Large tracts of land are designated as royal forest, not necessarily because they are heavily wooded, but because they are protected for hunting. Deer and boar matter to elite sport and prestige. This means ordinary people may face restrictions on hunting animals, or using woodland resources they once considered part of local life. There are few things more irritating than being told the deer eating your crops is effectively more important than you are. The forest itself feels deep and watchful. Oak leaves stir overhead. Damp moss softens the roots underfoot. The smell is cool, green, and faintly fungal, mixed with the sharper scent of crushed fern. Somewhere a woodpecker knocks at a trunk like a patient carpenter. Pigs root among fallen acorns, supervised by a swineherd carrying a staff polished by long use. Pig-keeping matters greatly here, because pork provides fat and meat, and woodland pasture can support animals without using valuable grain. You run your hand along the side of one broad sow and feel the bristles stiff and wiry against your skin. At midday, you return toward the manor court, where tenants gather because attendance is not optional, in the delightful way taxes are not optional. The Lord Steward presides with an expression that suggests he was born disapproving. Cases are heard over rents, missing labour, broken fences, debt, inheritance, and animals trespassing where animals absolutely knew they should not be. Manor courts handle the tiny frictions of everyday life, and those frictions are many. Medieval society is full of overlapping obligations, and somebody is always failing to fulfill one. A widow steps forward to defend her right to remain on a holding. A tenant is fined for not performing required labour. Another man complains that his neighbour's pigs damaged a patch of beans. The details are humble, but the stakes are not. Access to land can mean food. A missed obligation can mean punishment. Custom matters deeply. Memory matters too, because many rights and duties rest on what people insist has always been done, which is the medieval version of saying, "Trust me." That is how it works. The manor is built on labour service as much as rent. Many peasants owe days of work on the lord's domain, the portion of land reserved for his direct benefit. They plough his fields, reap his grain, cart his hay, repair his buildings. In return, they hold land of their own under varying terms. The exact balance differs from place to place, and historians debate how harshly obligations were imposed in different regions. Medieval England is not one smooth pattern. It is a patchwork of local practices stitched together by power, habit, and inconvenience. In the afternoon, you watch preparations for a meal in the hall. The upper world of the manor has textures and rhythms quite different from the village, though not always cleaner ones. Fresh rushes are spread across the floor. A servant carries jugs of ale. A hound noses a dropped crust and is scolded without conviction. The tables are set on trestles, practical furniture for a practical age. Light comes through narrow openings and from the fire, sending restless shadows up the walls. Food marks rank clearly. The Lord's table receives better bread, better cuts of meat, and finer presentation. Lower down the hall, portions grow simpler. Bread itself can reveal status, with white loaves for the privileged and darker, coarser bread for everybody else. You tear a piece of a rough loaf and feel the dense texture, still warm near the centre. A dish of pottage follows, thick with peas, herbs, and a bit of bacon fat if fortune has smiled. No one here is discussing fusion cuisine. They are discussing whether the stores will last. Then the hall shifts. A rider has arrived with news, and the room tightens around the message. Castles and manors exist in a world where rumour travels on horseback and can change the atmosphere before anyone finishes eating. The message concerns unrest nearby. A a dispute between neighbouring lords, and the possibility of armed men moving through the district. That possibility is enough. You feel it immediately. Servants lower their voices. The steward consults the household knights. One boy sent to fetch arrows tries to look grown and fails bravely. Violence is part of the background fabric of this age. Not always present, but always conceivable. A local feud, a succession quarrel, or a contested claim can send men into the road with shields and sharp intentions. The castle provides refuge for some, danger for others. Villagers may be ordered to supply carts, food, or labour for military needs they did not choose. This is one reason fear clings to the edges of everyday life. You can be planting beans in the morning and carrying grain for armed men by afternoon. Yet there are moments of odd delight too. In a corner of the hall, one of the younger household men has acquired a trained monkey, or perhaps a creature close enough to inspire that description in the records. Exotic animals did occasionally appear in elite circles through trade, gift exchange, or sheer noble whim. Nothing improves a medieval atmosphere quite like a small imported animal, behaving with complete disrespect near expensive people. The creature snatches a peel from a platter and escapes to the rafters, while the assembled dignity below pretends not to be flustered. As dusk approaches, villagers bring animals closer to home. Sheep bleat in pens, geese complain as if personally offended by evening. A cow shifts heavily in the byre, warm breath and hay smell filling the space. You help a boy spread fodder and feel the dry scratch of straw against your hands. He tells you, with absolute seriousness, that an old woman near the stream can tell from a rooster's cry whether winter will be cruel. Local weather lore is everywhere. Some of it probably works often enough to survive. Some of it is pure hope wearing a practical hat. The church bell sounds again through the fading light. Its tone drifts over field and yard, softening the edges of labour for a moment. You step inside the small church and feel the immediate coolness of stone. The smell of wax lingers near the altar. A painted wall shows saints in faded colours, their faces solemn, their garments patterned with lines now dimmed by time and smoke. A man kneels on the hard floor, murmuring a prayer for his son's fever. Faith here is not decorative. It is threaded through fear, gratitude, sickness, marriage, weather, harvest, and death. Scholars still disagree on how fully ordinary villagers absorbed official church teaching, because belief is messy, and records usually prefer the voices of clergy. What seems clear is that Christian practice mixed with local custom, seasonal habit, and the stubborn survival of older folk ideas. Holy days, blessings, charms, relics, and stories all meet in the same mental world. A person might attend Mass, trust in saints, and still avoid a certain crossroads after dark because everyone knows odd things gather there. Medieval certainty had room for many layers. Night settles slowly over the manor lands. The castle on its mound becomes a dark shape against the deepening blue. Fires glow in village windows like watchful eyes. From the hall comes the muffled sound of conversation, then laughter, then a snatch of song. From the cottages come quieter noises, bowls set down, children hushed, the last small tasks before sleep. The cold creeps in around your ankles first. It always seems to start there. You lie down at last on a pallet stuffed with straw, wrapped in a blanket rough but welcome. The room smells of smoke, wool, and the day's labour. Outside, a dog barks once, then again, then decides the matter is settled. Somewhere above, in the Lord's chamber, the people who own the land sleep with different worries from the people who work it. But everyone sleeps under the same weather, and everyone depends on harvest, order, and luck more than they would like to admit. This is medieval England as it settles into form through timber walls, open fields, manor courts, and watchful hills. It is a world built from obligation and adaptation, from the sound of bells and hammers, from the touch of wool and plough handles, from smoke that settles in your clothes and never quite leaves. It is not a still picture. It is a living arrangement, tense and practical, where castles rise, villages endure, and every day begins again with work waiting in the cold. You wake to bells, not one bell, but several, each a little different in tone, drifting through the chill morning like circles spreading across still water. One is deep and steady, another is thinner, almost silver. Together they pull the village, the fields, and the nearby manor into the rhythm of prayer long before the sun has fully climbed. The sound reaches you through damp air that smells of wet grass, wood smoke, and the faint mineral scent of stone after night mist. It is a summons, but also a habit, the kind that settles into the body until time itself seems to ring. You walk toward the church path, where the ground is soft beneath your shoes and brushed with dew. Thin blades of grass bend against your ankles. A crow lifts from the churchyard wall with a dry flap of wings, then settles again farther off to glare as if you have interrupted something important. Ahead of you. The small church sits with quiet certainty among graves and yew trees, its stone walls pale under the morning sky. Nearby stands a newer religious house, larger and more ambitious, with clean-cut masonry and round Norman arches that announce money, piety, and an appreciation for making buildings look impressively unignorable. Religion in medieval England fills the landscape as thoroughly as rain. Churches, monasteries, chapels, shrines, roadside crosses, and bells shape the imagination of the place. You do not need to be a monk to feel this order pressing gently, sometimes firmly, into every day. Birth is blessed, marriage is blessed, fields are blessed, ships are blessed, the sick are prayed over, the dying are shriven, the dead are buried with ritual words that matter deeply, whether fully understood or not. For many people, the church is not a separate sphere of life. It is the atmosphere life breathes. You step into the church, and the air changes at once. Outside there is damp earth and distant livestock. Inside there is cool stone, beeswax, and a faint sweetness from old incense that seems to cling to the walls. Candlelight trembles in front of a painted image of the Virgin. The flame is small, yet it makes the colours breathe. Blue, red, gold, and cream glow softly from the dimness. You run your fingertips along a column and feel the chill of stone polished by years of passing hands and brushing sleeves. A priest moves at the altar, arranging vessels, cloth, and books. His robe rustles softly. Latin slips from his mouth in measured phrases, sounding ancient and smooth, though the farmer kneeling near the door does not understand every word. That is normal. The mystery is part of the power. Medieval worship depends on gesture, repetition, smell, chant, and sight as much as literal comprehension. The lifting of the host, the sign of the cross, the ringing of a little bell at the right moment, all of these help shape a sacred reality felt in the body. Then the singing begins. It's not polished in the way a modern choir might be, but it rises with grave beauty. The notes linger in the stone space and seem to hover above your head. You feel them in your chest as much as hear them with your ears. A boy's voice wavers, then steadies. An older monk catches the line and holds it. For a few minutes, the whole church becomes sound, and every rough coat and mud-stained shoe shares the same wash of music. Even a coughing old man near the back seems briefly dignified by it. Monasteries and priories are among the great centres of medieval life, even for those who never take vows. You travel later that day to a nearby abbey where monks live according to a rule of prayer, labour, discipline, and study. The buildings are larger than the parish church and laid out with careful intent. A cloister walk frames a square of grass. The chapter house opens under carved arches. The refectory smells faintly of soup, herbs, and damp rushes. In one corner stand Riddams scrubs bowls with an expression suggesting holiness has not yet cured him of boredom. Monks are often imagined as figures who spend every waking hour glowing peacefully in candlelight, copying books while soft music plays from nowhere. The truth is much more human. They pray, certainly. They read and sing. They also worry about stores, discipline, repairs, rents, and whether Brother Matthew is once again pretending not to hear the bell for matins. An abbey is a spiritual community, but it is also an institution with lands to manage, tenants to supervise, guests to host, and accounts to keep. Even contemplation requires someone to check the grain. You enter the scriptorium, where books are made. The room smells of vellum, ink, wood shavings, and a little tallow smoke from the lamps. Light falls across desks where monks bend over pages with astonishing patience. One trims a quill with a small knife. Another rules lines with a lead point. Another paints a capital letter in red and blue, adding curling vines and tiny beasts that seem to grin from the edge of scripture with suspicious cheerfulness. You hear the scratch of pen on prepared skin, a delicate dry sound, steady as insects in summer grass. Here learning survives through slow hands. A manuscript is not simply written. It is assembled from animal skins carefully prepared into vellum or parchment, cut, folded, pricked, ruled, copied, corrected, and decorated. Ink stains fingertips. Pigments must be mixed. Mistakes must be scraped away with care. A large Bible can take months or years to complete. Even a smaller service book demands labour few outside this room ever witness. You look closely and see how crisp the black letters stand against the creamy page, each line marching with quiet discipline. In a world without printing, books are precious objects and symbols of power as well as vessels of thought. Many monasteries in England preserve religious texts, chronicles, saints' lives, legal documents, sermons, and works inherited from the ancient world. Mainstream historical fact rests comfortably here. Monastic scriptoria did play a crucial role in copying and preserving texts throughout the Middle Ages. Without these communities, much literature, theology, and history might simply have vanished into smoke, rain, mice, and human neglect. Civilization, you discover, sometimes survives because a sleepy monk keeps his handwriting neat. One monk lets you examine a page where the margins contain something unexpected. Beside the solemn text, a tiny rabbit appears to be blowing a horn at a dog who looks deeply offended. Medieval manuscript art can be gloriously strange. Marginal drawings include hybrid beasts, grinning faces, snails confronting knights, musical animals, and images that make you suspect the illustrator had spent too long indoors with too much imagination and not enough supervision. This is one of the delightful oddities of the age. Even in books devoted to devotion, a streak of whimsy wriggles happily in the edges. The library smells different from the scriptorium. It is drier, dustier, fuller of old leather and wooden shelves. Chains secure some valuable books to desks. Because piety is no cure for temptation, a monk explains, with patient pride, the arrangement of volumes. Though his explanation suggests the system may be obvious only to people who have lived among these books long enough to dream in catalogue entries. You trail your fingers over a binding and feel the grain of leather, worn smooth at the corners. Some books are imported, some were copied here. Some carry notes from generations of readers who left their minds quietly in the margins. Learning in medieval England is often centred in religious institutions, but not limited to them. Cathedral schools and, by the later Middle Ages, universities become important too. Clergy are trained in grammar, rhetoric, logic, theology, and law. Latin serves as the language of scholarship, linking England to a much wider intellectual world. Ideas travel along roads used by pilgrims, merchants, envoys, and ambitious students with tired feet. The island is not isolated. It is tied into European currents of thought, architecture, worship, and argument. Even if those currents arrive wearing muddy boots, you step into the cloister as noon approaches. Sunlight has finally warmed the stone a little, and you can feel a soft contrast beneath your palm where shadow gives way to light. In the central garth, herbs grow in neat plots. Rosemary, sage, rue, and mint release their scent when brushed. Somewhere beyond the wall, a kitchen worker chops leeks with quick thuds, a fountain trickles. Pigeons strut with absurd seriousness across the paving. The whole place feels ordered, yet never still. Sandaled feet pass. Voices murmur. Doors open and shut. A bell rings again and the monks turn almost at once, as if pulled by an invisible thread. Their day is divided by the canonical hours, the cycle of offices that structures prayer from night to night, matins and lauds in the dark or near dawn, then prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. It is a timetable of sanctity and fatigue. Rising before sunrise sounds noble when said quickly. It sounds less noble when you imagine doing it every day in January. Yet the rhythm is powerful. It breaks time into sacred intervals and gives shape to existence in a world where clocks are rare and bells are sovereign. At dinner in the refectory, the monks eat in near silence while one brother reads aloud from a religious text. Bowls of pottage steam on the tables. The scent of onions, beans, and a little salt rises warmly. Bread is sliced. Ale is poured. Wooden spoons knock lightly against pottery. You sit among them and notice the texture of the bread first. Rougher than the best manorial loaves, but satisfying. A little cheese follows, sharp and crumbly. The meal is plain, but hunger lends it dignity. One monk sneezes and receives 3 distinct looks of restrained disapproval, which somehow feels very monastic. Not every religious house is equally austere. Some abbeys grow wealthy from lands, rents, mills, fisheries, and gifts. Rich patrons endow altars, fund building projects, and hope prayer will help their souls after death. Norman and later Plantagenet rulers support monasteries for reasons both sincere and political. A powerful abbey can influence local society through employment, charity, hospitality, and legal authority. Pilgrims may stop there. Travellers may sleep there. The poor may receive alms there, though not always with the efficiency one might wish from hungry people in need of soup. You meet a monk responsible for the infirmary garden, and he speaks of herbs with the calm intensity of a man who trusts plants more than people. Lavender for comfort, sage for many complaints, fennel, mint, and angelica. Monastic medicine blends inherited classical knowledge, local remedies, prayer, and practical observation. Some treatments help. Some do very little. Some probably make matters worse in a very confident tone. Yet monasteries often preserve medical texts and provide care when few alternatives exist. Healing, like learning, lives among these walls. A visiting noblewoman arrives to pray before a relic kept in a side chapel. The reliquary is small, silver-worked, and set with coloured glass that catches the light like jewels. Relics matter profoundly in medieval devotion. The bone of a saint, a fragment of cloth, a vial said to contain holy oil. All of these can draw offerings, pilgrims, and stories. People seek healing, protection, favour, and hope through contact with the sacred. Whether every relic is authentic is another matter entirely. Medieval Europe shows a rather impressive ability to possess multiple versions of supposedly unique holy objects. Faith, commerce, and enthusiasm sometimes share the same purse. A scholarly uncertainty enters quietly here. Historians still debate how ordinary laypeople understood the finer points of Christian doctrine, especially in rural communities where clergy varied in education and sermons may have been brief, local, and practical. Records tell you much about official teaching, much less about private thought. Did villagers think precisely as theologians hoped? Probably not always. Did they hold a vivid, sincere, and emotionally powerful religious worldview anyway? Almost certainly. Human belief is rarely tidy enough to fit a bishop's handbook. In the afternoon, you accompany a monk to the abbey school, where several boys chant their grammar lesson with the melancholy energy of the young, everywhere forced to memorize declensions. Wax tablets rest in their laps. One has ink on his nose, another stares out the window with such devotion that you suspect he is contemplating escape rather than Latin. Education here is limited and unequal, but real. Literacy belongs to a minority, yet that minority can shape law, memory, administration, and culture for everyone else. A written charter can move boundaries more decisively than a shouted complaint. The abbey church grows golden toward evening. Sunlight pours through high windows and catches incense smoke until the whole nave seems full of pale drifting silk. The chant at vespers is lower now, slower, gentler. Shadows lengthen along the floor. You kneel and feel the stone press cold through the fabric at your knees. A candle guttering near a saint's image sends a thin thread of wax down the side. Somewhere in the choir, a page turns. Somewhere outside, a rook settles noisily in the trees. You notice then how the religious world joins grand ceremony to small ordinary things. Wax drips, sandals scuff, soup boils, quills splutter, bells crack slightly in winter frost. A monk clears his throat at the wrong moment and looks embarrassed. Holiness does not erase daily life. It settles within it, uses its objects, blesses its meals, records its disputes, and asks tired people to sing in the dark. That may be why medieval religion feels so pervasive. It inhabits both the vast and the humble. When night falls, the abbey quiets, but does not fully sleep. A lamp burns in one passage. Someone coughs behind a closed door. The smell of old stone deepens with coolness, and the garden outside gives off damp herbal sweetness. You step into the cloister one last time. Above you the sky is clear, pricked with stars, while the church tower rises black and motionless against them. Then, from inside, the soft beginning of Compline reaches you, the final office of the day, gentle as folded cloth. You listen. This is medieval England heard through bells, chant, and whispered prayer. It is felt in cold nave stones, in vellum under careful fingers, in herb gardens and smoky lamps, in monks whose duty binds time into sacred portions. Knowledge is copied here. Memory is stored here. Music is offered here. The ordinary and the eternal stand side by side beneath vaulted roofs and painted saints. And as the last notes fade into the night air, the whole land seems, for a moment, to breathe more slowly. By the time the sun climbs above the rooftops, the town is already awake in a way the countryside never quite is. Not louder exactly, though it is certainly loud enough, more crowded, more restless, more convinced that whatever needs doing should have been done an hour ago. You step through the gate just after dawn and feel the shift at once. The air smells of damp timber, horse dung, wood smoke, baking bread, and the sharp, almost cheerful sting of urine from the tanning quarter. Medieval towns are energetic places. They are also aromatic in a way that would make modern real estate brochures quietly give up. The street beneath your feet is rutted and uneven, packed hard in some places and slick in others. Rainwater has settled in shallow hollows that reflect bits of sky between boots and cartwheels. A pig noses through refuse by a doorway, absolutely convinced it is helping. Geese object to everyone. A woman opens shutters above a shop and tosses out a pail of stale water with the practiced warning shout that keeps her from becoming unpopular by noon. The day begins with movement, and the movement rarely stops. You have arrived in one of England's growing towns, the sort of place that swells gradually in the high medieval centuries as trade expands, craft production increases, and people gather where profit might be found. London is the giant among them, of course, but it is not alone. York, Norwich, Winchester, Bristol, Lincoln, and many others become busy urban centres where goods, news, arguments, and smells circulate with equal enthusiasm. This is one of the great developments of medieval England. The economy is no longer only a story of fields and manor courts. It is also a story of shops, stalls, tolls, wagons, and people trying very hard to sell each other things. A market square opens ahead of you. Not perfectly square, because medieval practicality has only a passing friendship with geometry. Wooden stalls stand beneath awnings of cloth and hide. Merchants are already arranging their wares with care that ranges from honest pride to deeply creative optimism. Fish laid on boards glisten in the morning light. Baskets of onions and leeks sit beside rough pottery and coils of rope. A butcher wipes his knife on an apron that has accepted long ago it will never be respectable. The smell of salted herring competes with fresh bread from a nearby oven, and the bread almost wins. You pause at a baker's stall, where round loaves are stacked in warm, fragrant towers. The crust is dark and firm. When one is split open, steam rises carrying the comforting smell of yeast and grain. You tear off a piece and feel the texture give between your fingers, dense but softer than the coarse village bread you know from the countryside. White bread is still a mark of status, but towns offer more variety, more possibility, more little temptations. Honey cakes appear on better days. Spiced wafers sometimes emerge where money is loose enough to enjoy them. In a medieval town, appetite has more to look at. A bell rings from the Guildhall, another from a church tower. Beneath them comes the steady murmur of voices bargaining, gossiping, complaining, boasting, and pretending not to complain while doing exactly that. You hear English in many local accents, with French still hovering in legal and elite settings, and Latin waiting in the wings whenever clerks become involved and ordinary people wish they would not. A Flemish trader is haggling over cloth. A sailor from farther west swears by the condition of his cargo. A woman selling eels has a voice sharp enough to cut through oak. Towns are where wool becomes money in motion. English wool is one of the great engines of the medieval economy, prized especially by cloth producers in the Low Countries. Sheep may look harmless enough, blinking at hedges with philosophical calm, but they are deeply implicated in the fortunes of kings, merchants, monasteries, and tax collectors. Sacks of wool move from estates to markets to ports. Customs duties on wool enrich the crown. Merchants build fortunes around it. You watch bales being weighed and marked, each one smelling faintly of lanolin, earth, and long weather. The fleece of a sheep is not glamorous, yet here it may as well be silver. You walk deeper into the town and the streets narrow between timber-frame buildings whose upper stories lean out over the road as if trying to overhear each other's business. Some houses have carved signs hanging above them, since not everyone can read. A boot for a cobbler, a key for a locksmith, a cup for an alehouse. Laundry flaps overhead on a line stretched between windows. Sunlight falls in broken strips, touching one shutter, one bucket, one cat, then sliding on. The wool smell of damp wood warmed slowly by the day. A blacksmith's shop pulls you in by sound first. Hammer on iron, hammer on iron, hammer on iron. The rhythm is stern and satisfying. Inside, the heat pushes against your face. Charcoal glows hot at the forge. Sparks leap as the smith draws out a strip of metal and bends it with decisive blows. The air tastes metallic. Sweat shines on his forearms. Leather, soot, and hot iron mingle into a smell that sits heavily in your nose. Here horseshoes are made, nails shaped, hinges repaired, knives edged, locks fitted. A town runs on metal more than people notice until the metal fails. Next door, a chandler works with tallow, and the mood changes instantly. The room is softer, greasier, and much less heroic. Rendered fat smells heavy and faintly unpleasant, but candles are indispensable. Light after dark depends on such labour. Elsewhere, a cooper shapes barrels, a fletcher binds feathers to arrow shafts, and a weaver tends a loom whose clacking has its own private patience. Urban life is built from specialised skill. A village household may do many things tolerably. A town supports people who do one thing well and charge for it. This is where guilds matter. Merchant guilds and craft guilds organise aspects of trade, regulate quality, protect privileges, and help members with mutual support. The details vary widely from town to town, because medieval England dislikes perfect uniformity almost as much as it dislikes uncollected dues. Still, guilds become powerful features of urban life. They shape apprenticeship, standards, and civic influence. If you want to bake bread legally, sell cloth respectably, or enter a trade without inviting trouble, you will likely feel a guild's presence sooner or later. You step into a weaver's workshop where an apprentice, perhaps 12 or 13, is winding thread with intense concentration and only occasional despair. Apprenticeship is one of the great structures of town life. A young person leaves home, enters a master's household, learns a craft, and spends years absorbing not just techniques but habits, discipline, and social rank. The arrangement can open a path to skill and status. It can also mean long hours, strict supervision, and living under someone else's roof while being told repeatedly that you're doing it wrong. Progress, as ever, has texture. The cloth in the room brushes your hand with surprising softness. Dyed wool hangs in lengths of blue, russet, green, and undyed cream. Some colours are muted, others rich enough to draw the eye from the street. Dyes come from plants, insects, minerals, and patient knowledge. Madder for reds, woad for blues, weld for yellow. The smell here is dusty, warm, and faintly oily from the fibres. Trade has senses as much as figures. You do not only count profit, you touch it, smell it, lift it, fold it, and pray moths stay away. At a nearby stall, imported goods lie out like promises from far away. Pepper in a small pouch, a little ginger, fine cloth from overseas, glass beads, a metal brooch delicately worked. Not everyone can afford such things, of course, but their presence matters. It tells you that medieval England is connected to larger networks of trade stretching across Europe and beyond. Ships move through the Channel and North Sea carrying wine, salt, cloth, wax, timber, iron, spices, and all the paperwork those goods will eventually inspire in some poor clerk. The island is busy, the roads are muddy, but the economy has ambition. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene neatly. By the 13th century, many English towns had secured charters granting certain rights and privileges, including forms of self-government, market rights, and legal protections. Townspeople often value these charters intensely, because a written privilege can mean freedom from some feudal burdens, or at least a more favourable set of burdens. Medieval liberty is rarely absolute. It is usually a carefully negotiated package of exemptions, obligations, and opportunities wrapped in very serious parchment. You pass the Guildhall where officials are arguing in tones of magnificent importance over weights and measures. This matters more than it sounds. Standardised measures help keep markets functioning and prevent cheating, or at least make cheating slightly more inconvenient. Bread can be inspected, ale can be judged, cloth width can be checked. Fraud appears in every century with enviable creativity, so regulation appears right behind it carrying a notebook. The assize of bread and ale, among other regulations, reflects the medieval determination to manage essential goods, because shortages and unfair prices can stir real anger. At midday you duck into an alehouse, partly for rest and partly because everyone else seems to be there already. The room is low-beamed and cheerful in a tired sort of way. Smoke curls toward the rafters. The benches are polished by generations of use and spilled drink. A pot of stew sends up the scent of cabbage, onion, and something meaty enough to improve morale. Ale is poured cloudy and cool into a wooden cup. You taste it. Mild, grainy, a little sour, not glamorous, but entirely welcome. Urban life runs on conversation, and conversation often runs on ale. Around you sit carters, craftsmen, a clerk with an ink stain on his cuff, 2 sailors who smell of tar and rope, and a woman clearly conducting 3 separate pieces of gossip with admirable efficiency. Towns gather people of different backgrounds more densely than most rural places. That creates opportunity, friction, and endless commentary. News travels fast here. So do rumours, which are faster and more entertaining. A shipment is late. A merchant has defaulted. A royal officer may be coming. A widow has remarried astonishingly soon. The bishop disapproves of something, which saves time because bishops often do. Not everyone in town is prosperous. Far from it. Urban growth creates wealth, but also crowding, insecurity, and stark inequality. Labourers unload carts, carry water, sweep yards, mend roads, and do the thousands of small hard jobs on which civic life quietly depends. Servants sleep in corners of shops or in lofts above workrooms. Widows may continue trades, take in work, or struggle. Migrants arrive hoping for a better chance than village life offered, and some find it. Others find only rent, noise, and disappointment in narrower streets. Opportunity and hardship share walls here. You cross a bridge where the river below carries barges and refuse with equal dedication. Waterways are vital for transport. Heavy goods move more efficiently by boat than by cart, and rivers help feed towns with grain, firewood, stone, and merchandise. The smell near the bank is strong. Mud, fish scales, wet rope, tar, and a less identifiable civic contribution mingle in the air. Gulls scream overhead. A porter staggers past with a sack on his back, breathing through his mouth and not out of poetry. A stranger points out a small chapel where merchants have funded lamps to burn before a saint who watches over travellers and trade. Piety follows money into town, though not always quietly. Urban churches can be richly endowed. with side chapels maintained by guilds or families seeking status and salvation in one useful package. Stained glass glows in better-funded parishes. Chantry priests may be paid to say masses for the dead. Processions move through streets on feast days with banners, candles, and music. Commerce does not replace faith. It settles beside it, donates to it, and occasionally tries to negotiate with it. For a quirky tidbit, you notice a group of boys surrounding a man who has brought a performing bear into town. Yes, a bear. It is muzzled, annoyed, and probably wiser than everyone present. Entertainers, jugglers, musicians, and animal handlers do appear in medieval urban life, especially during fairs and festive seasons. The crowd is delighted. The bear is not. A fiddler nearby scrapes out a tune while a pickpocket, almost certainly, finds the whole event professionally inspiring. Scholars still argue about how far urban identity in medieval England transformed people's sense of themselves. Did townspeople think of themselves sharply apart from rural society, with a distinct civic consciousness, or were local ties, parish loyalties, kinship, and trade still more important than any broad notion of being urban? The evidence points in several directions at once. Records speak of borough rights and civic pride, yet everyday life remains tangled in family, neighbourhood, and occupation. Human identity rarely arranges itself for the convenience of later historians. As afternoon leans toward evening, the market begins to thin. Sellers shout lower, buyers grow more selective, unsold fish looks sadder by the minute. One cart creaks toward the gate, another rattles in, church towers catch the late light. Somewhere, a bell announces a service. Somewhere else, a watchman is already preparing for his rounds. The street cools under shadow, and you can feel the damp rise again from the ground. A dog sleeps under a bench, having surrendered to the day. You walk toward the edge of town where workshops give way to gardens, paddocks, and the road out. Behind you, the place still hums, but softer now, like a loom slowing at dusk. Smoke from ovens and hearths hangs in the air. The last loaves are sold. Shutters close over windows. A cobbler lights a candle and bends again to his work because leather and daylight refuse to coordinate politely. In one upper room, a woman sings to a child. In another, a clerk totals accounts by fading light and regrets every choice that led him there. This is medieval England discovering the restless pulse of commerce. Not a clean break from rural life, but a new concentration of skill, trade, regulation, appetite, and ambition. You have felt it in the packed streets, in the hot forge, in the softness of dyed wool, in the taste of ale and fresh bread, in the jostling voices under hanging signs. Towns do not sleep as deeply as villages. They dream in ledgers, bells, and bargaining. And as evening gathers over the roofs, the market's energy settles into a quieter promise that tomorrow the shutters will open again, the square will fill, and the business of medieval life will begin once more. The court feels warm before you even enter it. Not with comfort exactly, but with bodies, candles, tempers, and expectation. By the time you step through the outer passage, servants are hurrying with platters, clerks are clutching rolls of parchment like shields, and armed men stand near the walls with the patient stiffness of people who are trying not to look as bored as they feel. The air smells of wax, rushes, damp wool steaming dry, roasted meat, and the faint iron scent of weapons that have been cleaned but not put far away. This is not a village morning or a town market day. This is politics, which in medieval England often means a hall full of ambitious people pretending to be loyal while calculating the nearest exit. You're in the orbit of kings now. Not only the king himself, though he is the bright and dangerous centre of it all, but the whole moving world around him. Royal government in medieval England is not fixed permanently in one neat capital office with labelled shelves and predictable hours. The court travels, it eats through provisions, it carries records, treasures, advisers, petitioners, priests, cooks, and trouble from one residence to another. Wherever the king goes, power goes with him, along with a large number of people who would very much like that power to notice them favourably. The hall is built to impress. Tall timbered roof, Heavy tables, bright cloths, a dais at the high end where status rises literally above everyone else. Hounds lie near the fire, opening one eye whenever anything edible passes. Light falls from the high windows in pale shafts that catch dust in the air, turning it momentarily golden. You run your hand along the bench and feel old polish worn smooth by generations of sleeves, elbows, and nervous fingers. Here law is discussed, alliances formed, quarrels sharpened, and careers either born or quietly strangled. A clerk nearby wets his pen and scratches in Latin on parchment, recording grants, judgments, and royal orders. Royal administration in England becomes impressively sophisticated during the medieval centuries. Chanceries write letters and charters. The Exchequer tracks revenue with a seriousness usually reserved for eternal truths. Sheriffs, justices, and other officials carry authority into the shires. Kings who can count, record, and enforce have an advantage over kings who rely only on shouting and a good horse. Medieval rule is personal, yes, but it is also increasingly documentary. Paperwork, or parchment work more precisely, is one of the quiet muscles of monarchy. The king enters, and the room changes instantly. Conversation drops, backs straighten. Every face arranges itself into some version of respect. Crown or no crown, a medieval king is first and foremost a human being whose moods matter greatly to everyone around him. If he is clever, energetic, suspicious, charming, devout, or vindictive, the realm feels it. England in the Middle Ages is shaped powerfully by the personalities of its rulers. William I builds and dominates. Henry I tightens administration. Stephen struggles in civil war. Henry II drives reform and conflict with astonishing force. John manages the rare feat of making nearly everyone angry. Edward I legislates and conquers with a relentless purpose. The royal office is stable in theory and very unstable in practice, because it keeps being occupied by actual people. Today the business before the court concerns land, rights, and obligations, which is to say the usual fuel of noble disagreement. A baron kneels to present a petition over disputed inheritance. Another lord seeks favour in a boundary quarrel. A bishop waits with practised patience to discuss privileges of the church, looking like a man determined to wrap steel inside courtesy. A widow hopes for confirmation of her dower rights. Each case brings voices, witnesses, sealed documents, memories, and interpretations, because no one ever thinks their opponent has remembered events correctly. Feudal bonds tie much of this world together, though never as neatly as later diagrams like to imply. Great lords hold land from the king in return for service, especially military service, and they in turn have tenants beneath them. But personal loyalty, family strategy, marriage alliances, local influence, and raw opportunity complicate everything. A baron may be the king's man and still resent him deeply. A king may reward a lord richly and still mistrust him. The whole structure rests on obligation, advantage, and the constant possibility of offence. You watch a group of nobles standing together near the hall door. Their cloaks are rich, their belts finely worked, their expressions composed, yet even from a distance you can sense the quiet competition among them. Whose daughter will marry well? Who will receive wardship of a valuable heir? Who will get the next sheriffdom or castle custody? Who has lost favour? Who has gained it? A medieval court has all the calm serenity of a pond full of hidden pike. The smiles are real enough, so are the teeth. This is one reason kings fear over mighty subjects. Great magnates command lands, men, castles, an influence that can rival royal authority in entire regions. If such men remain loyal, the kingdom functions. If they sulk, resist, or rebel, the kingdom begins to creak alarmingly. English history in the Middle Ages is full of these tensions. Barons want honour, autonomy, and reward. Kings want obedience, revenue, and military support. Each side believes its expectations are perfectly reasonable, which is a useful recipe for prolonged conflict. A mainstream historical fact arrives here with heavy boots. In 1215, a group of barons forced King John to seal Magna Carta, a document that attempted to limit arbitrary royal behaviour and protect certain rights and customs, especially for the church and the elite. It was not a modern democratic manifesto. Medieval barons were not secretly campaigning for universal equality while polishing spurs. But the charter mattered enormously as a statement that the king was not simply free to do whatever anger suggested. It would be reissued, argued over, invoked, and remembered long after the specific crisis that produced it. You're not in the meadow at Runnymede this moment, but the arguments in this hall hum with the same energy. How far can a king tax his subjects? How much consent is required? What counts as lawful judgment? Can royal officers seize, fine, imprison, or exploit without limit? These questions matter because kings need money constantly. War is expensive. Castles are expensive. Courts are expensive. Even majesty comes with invoices. When revenue demands rise too sharply, noble patience falls sharply in return. A messenger arrives, mud-splashed and tired from the road. The smell of horse follows him in, warm and sharp. He kneels, delivers sealed letters, and steps back while faces around him try not to reveal too much interest. News from the marches. Trouble in a county court, a dispute with a neighbouring ruler, a levy delayed, a marriage proposal moving uncertainly through channels of diplomacy. Medieval government runs on bodies in motion. Riders, envoys, sheriffs, clerks, and servants carry the kingdom together one journey at a time. You leave the hall for a while and walk through the outer ward, where squires are training with blunted weapons, wood strikes wood, boots grind in sand. A horse tosses its head nearby, impatient with human games. Chivalry is talked about elegantly in Romance literature, but its daily expression often looks like sweating young men trying not to get hit in the face. Knights matter deeply in this society, both militarily and socially. They are mounted warriors, landholders, household men, local figures of authority and consumers of honour. They also fall off horses, lose tempers, and complain about equipment. Reality refuses to become a poem on command. At the tilting ground, one squire has tied a scrap of ribbon to his sleeve because a lady noticed him once and he has not recovered since. Courtly ideals float through aristocratic culture, shaping behaviour, language, and imagination. Noble households are places of martial training, religious observance, and social performance all at once. Music may be played after supper. Stories may be told of Arthur or Troy or heroic saints. Fine manners matter. So does skill in war. A nobleman is expected to be impressive in several directions at once, which seems exhausting. The Queen's Chamber offers a different atmosphere, though not a less political one. Here the light is softer through linen hangings. The scent is of lavender, warm beeswax, and the faint spice of costly imported perfume. Ladies sew, talk quietly, and exchange news that may be dressed in politeness but travels with real consequence. Queens in medieval England are not merely decorative figures drifting through ceremonies in expensive fabric. They act as patrons, intercessors, landholders, diplomatic partners, and sometimes political players of great consequence. Their households create networks of influence that can affect appointments, alliances, and access to the king. A noblewoman speaks with measured force about her son's inheritance, and every man listening learns the useful lesson that silk does not prevent determination. Aristocratic women can hold estates, manage households, arrange marriages, sponsor religious houses, and defend family interests with remarkable tenacity. Their formal powers vary according to law, rank, widowhood, and circumstance, but they are far from invisible. Medieval documents may often speak in male voices, yet female action is everywhere if you look with patience. At dinner, the hall becomes a theatre of rank. The high table gleams with better vessels. Roasted game is carried in with ceremony. Bread is sliced cleanly. Wine appears for the privileged, while ale continues its honest service below. The smell is rich enough to make the whole room lean toward it. Music sounds from minstrels at the side, strings and pipes weaving through the clatter of cups and trenchers. You taste a little spiced sauce with the meat, and feel how luxury announces itself less by quantity than by detail. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, saffron. Tiny imported miracles for those who can afford them. A quirky tidbit drifts through the evening entertainment. Someone presents a trained peacock for display before the feast, not because it improves the meal particularly, but because nobles have long understood the importance of serving spectacle alongside food. Medieval, aristocratic dining could include theatrical presentation, symbolic dishes, and moments of elaborate showmanship that tell everyone watching exactly how prosperous and connected the host hopes to appear. Nothing says power quite like making dinner unnecessarily complicated, but beneath the ceremony sits anxiety. Succession is never entirely secure. A king with no strong heir invites calculation. A disputed accession invites war. Minority rule invites opportunists. Weak governance invites private violence. The memory of civil conflict remains vivid in aristocratic minds. During the reign of Stephen in the 12th century, the struggle between Stephen and the supporters of the Empress Matilda helped produce a period later remembered as the Anarchy, when chroniclers lamented disorder, local castle building, and suffering. The exact extent of collapse varies by region and remains debated, but the fear it left behind was real. Barons prefer strong kings until the kings become too strong. You speak with a royal justice who has spent months travelling circuits through the shires. His boots are dusty, his cloak weather-worn, and his patience appears nearly saintly. Royal justice expands significantly under rulers such as Henry II, whose legal reforms helped develop common law procedures and the use of juries in certain contexts. The crown increasingly inserts itself into disputes once handled more locally. This strengthens royal authority and gives subjects additional avenues for legal redress, though no one would mistake the process for swift convenience. Medieval law likes detail, formula, and delay almost as much as modern law does. Scholars still disagree over how far ordinary subjects experienced royal government mainly as protection rather than burden. For some, the king's justice offered a real alternative to local lordship and private coercion. For others, royal demands for taxes, service, and obedience may have felt simply like another layer of pressure pressing down from above. The crown could be both remedy and problem, sometimes in the same season. That ambiguity sits at the heart of medieval monarchy. After supper, as torches are lit and the hall glows amber, a quarrel nearly erupts between two retainers over precedence, that delicate subject on which civilizations occasionally choose to wobble. One claims his lord should have been seated nearer the dais. The other replies with a smile so thin it could cut cloth. Hands drift toward dagger hilts. Voices sharpen. Then an older knight intervenes with the speed of someone who has seen too much foolishness to tolerate another helping. Peace is restored, though not improved. Pride, you discover, is among the most renewable resources in the realm. You step outside into the cooler night air. The stars are faint above drifting cloud. From the stables comes the shifting sound of horses and the sweet, dusty smell of hay. A guard walks the wall with spear and torch, his footsteps slow and regular. In a side chamber, clerks are still working by lamplight because kings sleep more easily when records continue multiplying in the dark. Somewhere a woman laughs. Somewhere a prisoner coughs. Somewhere a lord lies awake, wondering whether the king trusts him, whether his neighbour envies him, and whether either problem may soon need armed attention. This is medieval England at the level of power, where kingship is both sacred office and daily negotiation. Courts travel, charters are sealed, barons kneel and scheme, queens intercede, clerks write, messengers ride. Every favour has weight. Every insult leaves a mark. You have felt the warmth of the hall, the pressure of rank, the rustle of parchment, the dangerous softness of noble courtesy. Rule here is never only about crowns. It is about people, memory, obligation, appetite, and the constant balancing of authority against resistance. And in the torchlit dark beyond the hall, the kingdom waits, listening for what tomorrow's decisions will bring. The first sign is not drama. It is absence. You wake expecting the familiar sounds of work beginning at first light, the cough near the hearth, the creak of a cart axle, the low complaint of cattle waiting to be fed. Instead, the morning feels strangely thinned out, as though someone has taken an ordinary day and quietly removed half its weight. The air is still cool, carrying the smell of damp earth and ashes from fires left low through the night. A bell rings in the distance, but no answer rises from the lane outside, no voices, no boots in the mud, no child running on an errand with breath clouding in the chill. You step into a village changed by sickness. The houses stand where they always stood, thatched and timbered, doors low and uneven, smoke drifting from a few roofs. Yet the place feels hollowed. A pail sits abandoned near the well. A gate hangs open. Chickens scratch with great seriousness beside a threshold no one has swept. The silence is not complete, which would almost be easier to bear. It is interrupted by little ordinary sounds that only make the emptiness sharper. A dog barks once. A shutter knocks softly against a frame. Somewhere inside a cottage. Someone is praying in a voice worn thin by fear. You've arrived in the shadow of plague. The Black Death reaches England in 1348 and spreads with devastating speed into 1349, returning in later outbreaks as well. It is one of the great turning points of medieval history, though for the people living it there is nothing grand about it. There is fever, weakness, confusion, grief, and the unsettling fact that neighbours vanish from daily life almost overnight. Modern historians estimate that a very large share of the population died, perhaps around a third to a half in some areas, though exact figures remain debated because medieval records are uneven and survival varied by region. Whatever number you choose, the human scale is terrible. The smell of the place has changed. Villages and towns usually carry a rough blend of dung, smoke, brewing, cooking, sweat, and wet straw. Now there is more ash, more stale air from closed rooms, more herbs hung in bunches near doors, as if rosemary and rue might hold the boundary between life and death by scent alone. People scatter green branches, burn incense where they can afford it, and carry posies under their noses. The perfume is sharp, bitter, hopeful. Hope often smells medicinal when it is desperate. You enter a cottage where a woman sits beside the bed of her husband. The room is hot from a fire kept going despite the season, because people still believe warmth may help, or at least feels kinder than cold. The straw mattress rustles when he shifts. A bowl of water sits untouched. Garlic hangs from a beam. Her hands are rough and reddened from work and washing, and she twists the edge of her apron without noticing. The priest has already been and may come again if called, though there are more calls now than any one man can answer. Disease in the medieval world is understood through a blend of inherited medical theory, religious explanation, local custom, and frightened improvisation. Learned physicians may discuss corrupted air, imbalance of humours, planetary influences, and the movement of poisonous vapours. Ordinary people speak of God's wrath, bad winds, unlucky meetings, or mysterious contagion carried in cloth, breath, or rumour. In truth, no one has the full answer. That ignorance sits everywhere, heavy as weather. When people do not know why death has entered the lane, every smell, every stranger, every object begins to look suspicious. You walk toward the churchyard. The ground underfoot is damp and soft, and the grass brushes your hem with cold dew that should feel fresh, but now only feels intrusive. At the gate, more graves have been opened than usual. Men who would normally be in the fields are here with spades instead, pausing often to straighten their backs and wipe sweat from their faces. The smell of disturbed soil rises dark and raw. A priest murmurs the burial office again and again until the words seem to wear grooves in the air. This is where plague becomes visible not only in bodies but in labour. Who ploughs when the ploughman is gone? Who milks when the dairymaid is buried? Who reaps when half the hands in the village are missing? That question spreads quickly once the first wave of terror passes. The dead are mourned, of course. They are also needed, and need does not end when life does. Medieval society rests on labour so completely that a sudden shortage shakes every rung of the social order. Fields go partially untilled. Wages rise where workers can bargain, lords complain, survivors notice. You walk from village to manor and find the same unease there, though draped in better fabric. The steward looks haggard. His rolls of account lie open on a table, but numbers now seem to describe loss rather than order. Tenants missing, rents uncertain, services unperformed, livestock unattended. A man accustomed to thinking in obligations now faces a world where obligation cannot summon the dead back to work. The hall smells of rushes, spilled ale, and anxiety, which has its own texture, taut and almost metallic on the tongue. In the kitchen, fewer servants move between the hearth and tables. One young boy tries to carry 2 duties at once and nearly drops a pot of pottage. A cook curses softly and then, remembering himself, crosses himself. The stew smells of onions, cabbage, and barley, but it is thinner than the household prefers. Supply has become unpredictable. Even where food exists, getting it harvested, carted, and cooked depends on bodies that may no longer be available. Nothing reveals the fragility of daily comfort quite like a shortage of the people who produce it. Some lords try to hold old arrangements in place with determination bordering on fantasy. If tenants owe labour, then labour must be delivered. If customary dues have long been paid, then surely they should continue. But surviving peasants and workers recognise their new value. They can demand better terms, or they can leave. They can threaten to leave, which often works nearly as well. A mainstream historical fact settles firmly here. In 1351, the English Crown issued the Statute of Labourers in an attempt to cap wages and bind workers to pre-plague expectations. Authorities feared social instability and rising labour costs. Workers, understandably, were not charmed. You meet a reeve whose face shows the strain of holding a manor together with fewer hands than the system requires. He speaks of fields left partly unworked, of sheep wandering farther than they should, of harvest plans made and remade. His cloak smells of rain and sheep oil. His boots are caked with mud thick enough to gain weight as he walks. He has no time for elegance. Administration in a crisis becomes very physical. Count the sacks, find the men, patch the roof, bury the dead, start again. Towns suffer too, in their own compressed way. You enter a street where shutters are closed over several shops, and the silence has that eerie urban quality in which you can sense how noisy it ought to be. A cask stands half unloaded by a warehouse door. An apprentice sits on a step rubbing sleep from his face, because his master is sick and there is no one else to open. The smell near the river is as strong as ever. Tar, fish, mud, and refuse. But the market square is thinner. Less push and clamour. More glancing and distance. People watch each other now with caution sharpened by grief. Doctors, barber surgeons, priests, herbal women, and neighbours all do what they can, with varying skill and luck. Some lance swellings. Some recommend bloodletting. Some prescribe herbs, vinegar, prayer, or avoidance of corrupted air. Some simply sit with the sick because no remedy works and no one should die alone. The touch of a cool cloth on a burning forehead, the taste of watered ale when plain water is distrusted, the smell of lavender or mint crushed between fingers. These small acts of care become important beyond measure when cures fail. Compassion is often the only effective treatment available. A curious tidbit survives from the wider age of plague. People in parts of Europe sometimes wore or carried strong-smelling substances, flowers, spices, or aromatic woods in the belief that sweet or piercing scents could defend against bad air. In England, too, scented herbs and fumigations appear among responses to epidemic fear. The theory is wrong, but the instinct is deeply human. If danger travels invisibly, then scent becomes a kind of shield. You can understand why someone would cling to rosemary as if it were reason. At the parish church, attendance is uneven and intense. Some come more often, seeking mercy, confession, or simply the steadiness of familiar ritual. Others stay away from crowds when they can. Candles burn before saints associated with healing or protection. Wax drips down in pale streaks. The air smells of incense and damp stone. Voices in prayer sound raw, not ceremonious. Faith during plague is neither simple comfort nor total despair. It is a struggle to interpret suffering in a universe believed to have purpose. That struggle leaves marks. Some conclude that sin has invited punishment. Some give alms more generously. Some endow masses for the dead. Some make wills in greater numbers, arranging gifts to family, church, and charity while they still can. Records from the period reveal a practical piety sharpened by emergency. People think about burial, soul, memory, and inheritance together. The nearness of death makes parchment important. A witness must be found, a seal pressed, a final intention fixed before strength disappears, and yet not everyone becomes more obedient or devout. Labour shortages create chances, empty holdings become available, land can be leased on better terms, servants can renegotiate. Women may assume roles left vacant by loss, managing shops, holdings, and households with an authority born from necessity. The old order strains. It does not vanish at once, but it begins to slip in places where previously it had seemed as fixed as the church tower. Crisis opens doors that custom had kept shut. You sit with a group of villagers at dusk while they share bread and a little cheese beside a fire outdoors, not entirely trusting enclosed rooms. The smoke drifts low and catches in your throat. Someone speaks of a neighbouring village where hardly any remain. Another insists that in a certain town the pestilence passed more lightly after processions were held. Another says cats are involved somehow, which shows how rumour thrives whenever explanation fails. Historians still argue over many details of how plague spread in different local settings and how much contemporaries understood about patterns of contagion. The evidence is complex and often fragmentary. Fear, however, leaves very clear traces. One young woman at the fire laughs suddenly at something absurd, a goat that ate funeral flowers, perhaps, or a clerk who fell into a ditch while trying to look dignified. The laughter startles everyone, then spreads. For a moment the group sounds like any other evening gathering. That matters. People do not become symbols because historians later name a catastrophe. They remain people. They joke. They snap at each other. They get hungry in the middle of grief. They worry about shoes, rents, weather, and children with runny noses while death moves through the parish. Ordinary life keeps insisting on itself, stubborn as grass between stones. As months pass, the economic changes begin to settle into pattern. Lords lease domain lands more often because direct management with scarce labour becomes harder. Wage labour grows in importance. Some peasants improve their conditions, others remain poor. But poor in a world where the balance between land and labour has shifted. This does not create fairness. Medieval society is too inventive for that. It does, however, force adjustment. Custom is no longer simply inherited. It is argued over, priced again, and sometimes resisted openly. The state responds with law, complaint, and enforcement. Officials try to punish workers who take higher wages or move in search of better opportunities. Employers seek exemptions. Communities negotiate quietly around regulations that prove difficult to impose everywhere. Tension between statute and reality becomes part of the story. When rulers order the world back into its old shape, the world often nods politely and continues being altered. Night comes cool and clear. You walk past fields where fewer lamps gleam than there once were. The scent of turned soil lingers in places where burial and agriculture now disturb the same earth for different reasons. Frogs sound from a marshy edge. Somewhere a horse stamps in its stall. The stars overhead look indifferent, bright and cold. Beneath them, households count the missing in ways official records never fully can. One empty stool, one unused cup, one corner of the bed too neat. Yet from several cottages comes the low murmur of spinning, mending, planning. A widow discusses a lease with her son. Two men compare wage offers from neighbouring manors. A girl who once served in a larger household now thinks she might choose where to go next. These are quiet shifts, but they matter. The plague has not only taken, it has rearranged possibilities. Loss has opened hard spaces in which new bargaining power, new resentments, and new forms of dependence take root. This is medieval England under the long shadow of disease, where silence replaces bustle, where churchyards widen, and where social order begins to move under pressure. You have felt the heat of a sick room, the bitterness of herbs, the cold softness of fresh dug earth. the thinness of pottage in an understaffed kitchen, the strained hope of prayer in a candlelit nave. The pestilence is not only a wave of death, it is a force that unsettles labour, faith, law, and expectation. And as the village settles uneasily into darkness, with too few voices on the lane and too many questions left unanswered, the whole realm seems to listen to its own changed heartbeat. You enter the city through sound first, not the grand ceremonial kind, though bells are certainly involved, because bells in medieval England are involved in nearly everything. This is a denser sound, layered and practical, hammering from a workshop, a cartwheel shrieking in protest, a woman calling out the price of onions, a cooper thumping hoops onto a barrel, dogs snapping, children yelling, someone laughing too loudly in an alehouse doorway before noon, which suggests either great confidence or poor judgment. The whole street seems to vibrate with human effort, and by the time you have taken 10 steps, your sleeves already smell faintly of smoke and other people's business. This is urban life in full working order. You are in a town where craft, commerce, religion, and minor irritation live side by side. The street beneath your feet is packed earth and scattered stone, slick where wastewater has run across it, rough where old repairs never quite match the original surface. Houses lean overhead as if in conversation, their upper floors jutting out above shop fronts and passageways. Shutters stand open to show wares hanging, stacked, folded, tied, and displayed with hopeful precision. A painted sign creaks gently in the breeze. Somewhere overhead, a woman beats a rug from a window with the grim resolve of someone settling a private score. The smell changes every few yards. Here it is warm bread and yeast from a baker's oven. There it is wet leather from a cobbler's bench. Then a burst of wood smoke, horse dung, fish scales, onions, ale, wool grease, damp straw, candle tallow, and that sharp public note that always follows where many people live close together and sanitation remains an aspiration rather than a triumph. Medieval towns are not delicate places. They're alive in a very physical way. You follow the busiest lane toward the market, where the crowd thickens and presses at your shoulders. Cloth brushes your arm. A basket nearly hits your hip. Someone mutters an apology that sounds more like blame. A boy carrying kindling slips through impossible gaps between adults, followed by a girl with a jug balanced against her waist and an expression that says she has no patience for anyone's feet. The market square opens ahead, full of stalls, carts, benches, crates, and noise. It feels like the inside of a hive, except with more mud. At one end, a fishmonger is conducting sales with the authority of a bishop and the vocabulary of a sailor. His table glistens with river fish and salted sea catch. The smell is formidable. At another stall, a woman sells eggs, herbs, and small rounds of cheese wrapped in cloth. Nearby, a butcher wipes his hands and argues over the weight of a joint. Measures matter, prices matter, reputation matters perhaps most of all, because customers remember very clearly who sold them thin ale, mouldy bread, or a cut of meat that looks suspicious even by the standards of the age. Guild life shapes much of what you see. Craft guilds regulate trades, supervise training, inspect quality, and defend the privileges of members with steady determination. Merchant guilds oversee broader commercial interests and civic influence. The exact arrangements differ from town to town, because English urban life remains delightfully resistant to perfect standardization. Still, the principle is clear enough. If you make shoes, brew ale, weave cloth, or work metal, your trade is not simply your private affair. It belongs to a structured world of rules, ranks, dues, and community expectations. You stop at the workshop of a cordwainer, a maker of fine leather shoes. The interior is low and warm. Leather hangs from pegs, smelling rich, earthy, and slightly oily. Wooden lasts line the wall like a row of patient feet waiting for bodies. An apprentice sits bent over a shoe, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, while he draws waxed thread through tough leather. The master checks a seam with one calloused thumb and grunts approval. Skill here is visible in the smallest things: a straight cut, a neat stitch, a sole that sits just right. Urban respectability often begins with doing a humble task better than the next person. Apprenticeship governs the making of such skill. A boy, and sometimes in practice a girl in certain settings, enters a household to learn a craft over years of service and discipline. He sweeps floors, runs errands, prepares materials, watches, imitates, fails, tries again, and slowly absorbs both the trade and the habits expected of an adult working within it. The arrangement is educational, economic, and social all at once. It can open doors into citizenship, independence, and marriage. It can also involve being shouted at while holding tools incorrectly in a room that smells like glue. You cross to a lane where brewers and ale sellers are active. The air is pleasantly sour with malt and warm grain. Brewing is essential because ale is a daily drink for many, safer and more reliable than doubtful water. Women, often called alewives in the records, are deeply present in this trade, especially at smaller scales. Ales may be brewed at home and sold locally, though regulation follows quickly wherever profit appears. Officials inspect quality and price under the assize of bread and ale and related local customs, because nothing stirs public unrest faster than bad drink and unfair cost. Civilization, at its core, is partly a battle against disappointing ale. Inside a tavern, the benches are worn smooth by elbows, cups, and confessions. The room smells of malt, smoke, damp wool, and stew thickening near the fire. A server brings you a cup of ale, cloudy and cool, with a taste both grainy and faintly tart. It is not refined, but it is honest. Around you sit men from different trades, a carter with mud dried on his boots, a clerk with ink on his cuff, 2 sailors smelling of rope and salt, and a woman who is clearly hearing everything while pretending to mind her own business. Taverns are places of refreshment, but also centres of rumour, hiring, negotiation, gambling, complaint, and occasional regrettable singing. You overhear talk of wages, contracts, and missed deliveries. After the demographic shocks of the 14th century, labour remains a subject of constant tension. Workers know their value better than lords and employers would prefer. Masters complain about rising costs. Journeymen look for better terms. Servants change households. Town authorities attempt regulation. The result is a world of steady bargaining. Medieval urban life is often imagined as rigid, but in practice it contains plenty of movement and friction. Money makes people mobile in ways custom cannot completely contain. A mainstream historical fact anchors the day. By the later Middle Ages, many English towns possess substantial civic institutions, including mayors, bailiffs, councils, and courts that handled urban governance, trade regulation, and public order. Borough identity could be powerful. Citizenship or burgess status carried privileges and obligations. Taxes had to be raised, streets repaired, markets supervised, disputes settled. A town was not just a cluster of houses with commerce attached. It was a legal and political body, often proud of its chartered rights and deeply unwilling to surrender them. You make your way to the Guildhall, where the officials of the town are at work with faces arranged in that special expression public servants cultivate when trying to look wise, while 3 unrelated problems arrive at once. Inside, the chamber smells of wax, vellum, damp cloaks, and the faint dusty odour of stored records. A clerk reads out a complaint about a blocked drain. Another matter concerns a shopkeeper accused of using false weights. A third involves a disagreement over apprenticeship terms. Urban administration turns out to be a long sequence of small crises, each entirely capable of ruining somebody's afternoon. Outside again, you pass a row of houses with workshops below and family quarters above. This mixed life is characteristic of the town. Work and home are rarely cleanly separated. A child sleeps in the room next to woven cloth. Supper is cooked over the same fire that warmed glue or dye water earlier in the day. Accounts are tallied on a bench where a grandmother later shells peas. A widow may inherit the business and continue it. A daughter may spin, sell, calculate, and negotiate as part of household survival. Medieval urban households are economic units before they are private retreats. Though privacy in any modern sense would probably have seemed a charming fantasy. In a narrow lane, you find the dyer's quarter announced long before you see it by smell. Dyeing is a pungent art. Vats steam with mixtures that can be earthy, sour, mineral, and aggressively memorable. Wool hangs in lengths of blue, red, green, and russet, dripping colour in the light. Woad lends its deep blue, madder offers red, weld gives yellow, and combinations create subtler shades. The cloth feels damp and heavy against your fingers when the dyer lifts a length for inspection. He speaks proudly of colour fastness, and with good reason. A good dye job can mean higher value and better trade. A poor one means embarrassment that walks through the town on someone else's shoulders. Religious life remains everywhere in the urban setting too. Parish churches rise among workshops and dwellings, their towers visible above roofs and chimneys. You enter one in the afternoon and feel the city soften for a moment into coolness and echo. The nave smells of stone, old wood, wax, and the faint sweetness of incense from an earlier service. A candle burns before an image of a saint favoured by craftsmen. Another glows near a side altar endowed by a guild. Civic and spiritual identity intertwine here. Guilds sponsor lights, masses, banners, and processions. Merchants fund chapels. The dead are remembered within the same walls that frame the prayers of the living. On feast days, the town can transform into a moving pageant of devotion and spectacle. Banners unfurl, bells ring in merry cascades. Guild members process in order. Priests chant, musicians pipe and drum. The streets that usually smell of trade fill instead with flowers, candles, painted cloth, and watchful faces leaning from upper windows. Urban religion is communal and visible. It shapes not only belief, but the look and rhythm of public space. Even the grumpiest cobbler is eventually forced to acknowledge a procession when it passes directly under his window with brass and Latin. A quirky detail brightens the day near the river. A guild has sponsored a small pageant cart for a festival performance, and the painted devil figure on it is so enthusiastically ugly that several children love it immediately while one toddler bursts into tears. Medieval urban entertainment can be delightfully theatrical. Mystery plays, miracle plays, and civic performances in some towns bring biblical scenes to life in streets and squares, with costumes, props, music, and a degree of practical improvisation that must have tested everyone's nerves. Nothing says reverence like trying to organise a solemn sacred drama while a wheel on the stage cart comes loose. You walk down to the waterfront where the town opens toward trade and travel. Warehouses line the bank, ropes creak, barrels roll. Men unload sacks of grain, bundles of wool, casks of wine, and lengths of imported cloth. The river smells of mud, fish, wet wood, and tar. Gulls wheel overhead, shrieking with professional confidence. Water transport is the bloodstream of urban supply. Heavy goods move more efficiently by boat than cart, and ports connect England to wider commercial worlds reaching across the North Sea, the Channel, the Bay of Biscay, and beyond. A town with a river or harbour breathes differently from one without. At the edge of the wharf, you see poorer labourers waiting for hire, shoulders hunched against the wind, caps pulled low. Urban prosperity does not touch everyone equally. Some thrive as merchants or masters. Some live by casual work, carrying loads, digging ditches, unloading ships, sweeping yards, or serving in kitchens and stables. Poverty is visible here, in patched clothing, narrow meals, rented corners, and anxious faces watching the labour market with trained attention. Charity exists through hospitals, parish support, and alms, but need often outpaces comfort. Towns gather wealth and hardship together more tightly than almost anywhere else. A scholarly uncertainty rises as evening settles. Historians still debate how cohesive medieval urban communities truly were beneath their corporate language of civic unity. Charters, councils, and guild rituals speak grandly of common good, but faction, neighbourhood rivalry, class tension, and conflict between elites and ordinary townspeople are never far away. Was the town a unified body, or a negotiated balance of competing interests dressed in civic ceremony? Probably both, depending on the hour, the tax, and who was speaking. As darkness approaches, the market thins and the watch begins to stir. Shutters close over stalls. Shopkeepers carry goods inside. A bell marks the evening. Lamps and candles appear in windows like cautious stars. The street smells cooler now, the heat of day fading from timber and stone. You feel dampness rise again from the ground. A watchman with a staff passes, calling the hour with an authority greater than his wages. Somewhere a fiddler plays in an alehouse. Somewhere a baby cries above a shop. Somewhere in an upper room, a woman counts coins under candlelight and decides whether the week has gone badly or merely ordinarily. You return to the tavern for a final cup and find the mood softer than before. The room glows gold from the hearth. The stew has thickened. The benches are fuller. Conversation has lowered into that evening register, where people stop performing the day and begin inhabiting themselves again. A mason rubs his shoulder. A young apprentice nearly sleeps sitting up. Two neighbours continue an argument about a boundary wall, with the weary commitment of men who may still be discussing it at Christmas. A servant laughs into her cup. Someone begins a song. Others join badly. It is perfect. This is medieval England in its urban pulse, where craft and commerce shape the hours, where guilds regulate ambition, where alehouses collect the noise of the day, and where civic life is built from records, labour, quarrels, and shared streets. You have felt the smoothness of worked leather, the damp weight of dyed cloth, the sour comfort of ale, the close press of a market crowd, the cool hush of a parish church in the middle of trade. The town is restless, imperfect, crowded, and endlessly alive. And when the last shutters are barred and the watchman's call drifts through lanes glossy with night damp, the city settles only lightly into sleep, ready to begin all over again at dawn. You wake to the sound of archery practice. It comes in a steady rhythm across the field outside the town wall. The twang of bowstrings, the dull, starred thud of arrows striking targets, the occasional muttered curse when one does not. Morning air lies cool against your face, carrying the smell of cut grass, damp leather, and the faint wood smoke of breakfast beginning in nearby houses. A line of men stands in the pale light with longbows in hand, shoulders squared, fingers roughened, eyes narrowed against distance. War, in medieval England, is not always something far away on a glorious foreign field. Sometimes it begins with local practice on a wet patch of ground, while someone nearby is still thinking about porridge. The archers loose again. Their bows are tall and powerful, almost the height of the men using them. You can hear the strain in the wood, feel the tension in the silence before release, and then watch the arrows leap forward with unnerving speed. One shaft lands cleanly, another glances off. A boy retrieving them from the target bank moves with great caution and only slightly exaggerated self-preservation. It is wise. The longbow becomes one of the most famous weapons associated with medieval England, and for good reason. English armies draw heavily on skilled archers, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, changing the shape of battle in ways that nobles in heavy armour do not always enjoy. You walk past the butts and toward the road where carts creak under supplies meant for a lord's retinue, sacks of grain, barrels of ale, bundles of arrows, spare bowstaves, coils of rope. War has logistics, though songs often prefer not to mention the barrels. Horses snort clouds into the cool morning. Leather harness smells rich and oily. Iron fittings clink. A smith checks the nails on a destrier's shoe while a servant tightens straps with fingers numbed by the chill. Nothing about military preparation feels elegant up close. It feels busy, expensive, and oddly full of waiting. England's wars in the later Middle Ages stretch both across the Channel and within the kingdom itself. Campaigns in Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and France all shape royal policy, taxation, identity, and memory. The 100 Years' War in particular becomes a long and shifting struggle with France, marked by raids, sieges, treaties, victories, defeats, and the sort of dynastic arguments that begin in parchment and end in mud. Kings pursue claims, nobles seek honour and profit, soldiers seek wages, plunder, survival, or simply the next meal. Chroniclers later smooth these motives into noble patterns. The ground rarely does. You join a marching column for part of a day and discover at once that medieval warfare involves a great deal of walking beside people who smell strongly of wool, sweat, leather, and damp horse. Men carry bows, bills, spears, knives, shields, and bundles of possessions tied in cloth. The road is muddy where carts have passed first, and each boot sinks a little, lifts with effort, then slips again. A knight in polished mail may catch the eye, certainly. Yet most armies are full of ordinary movement, sore feet, complaints about rations, and endless adjustments to straps that seemed fine an hour ago. A veteran marcher beside you points with his chin toward a cluster of mounted men farther ahead. Knights still matter, of course. Mounted warriors remain symbols of prestige and vital military figures. Their armour gleams where the light catches it. Their horses are powerful, restless animals with flared nostrils and bright, uncertain eyes. But battlefield reality is changing. Infantry, disciplined formations, and missile troops can humble noble expectations with alarming efficiency. The age of the knight does not end suddenly. It grows more complicated, and complication is not always kind to pride. A mainstream historical fact settles into view here. English victories at Crécy in 1346 and Agincourt in 1415 became famous in large part because massed archery helped devastate French forces under certain battlefield conditions. Terrain, command decisions, weather, and armour all matter too. But the longbow entered legend through these encounters. Later patriotic memory would turn such battles into symbols of national prowess. On the day itself, however, they were also scenes of terror, exhaustion, and men trying not to die in fields that quickly ceased to look picturesque. You do not stand inside one of those named battles at this moment, yet everywhere around you are the elements from which such days are made. Fletchers binding feathers with practised speed, priests hearing confession before departure, captains counting men twice because someone is always missing, cooks stirring a thin meal in camp kettles, a clerk reading names from a list while the wind lifts the corner of his parchment and annoys him beyond measure. War is made not only by heroics but by administration, food supply, horse care, weather judgment, discipline, and luck. A kingdom that can organise these things well fights better than one that merely talks impressively. By midday, the camp has formed on a low rise above a stream. Tents of the wealthier sort stand nearest the command area, their cloth bright enough to suggest dignity even while flapping rudely in the wind. Common soldiers sleep more simply under rough shelters or the open sky. The ground beneath you is uneven and still damp from the night. Grass presses cold through the fabric at your knee when you kneel to examine a cooking fire. The smoke is harsh and catches in your throat. Nearby, salted meat is being boiled with onions and whatever grain the quartermaster has managed to acquire without open mutiny. The smell is not inspiring, but it is warm, and warmth counts for much. In camp, social rank remains visible but never entirely secure. A great lord may dine beneath embroidered cloth. A common archer may eat from a wooden bowl squatting by the fire. Yet both know that battle makes strong claims on all bodies, and arrows are famously indifferent to ancestry. That blunt truth gives warfare a strange social edge. It reinforces hierarchy through command and reward, while exposing everyone to a shared unpredictability. Chivalric ideals still circulate. So do lice. You hear one knight speaking grandly of honour, ransom, and noble deeds performed under banners, a few paces away. An archer is rubbing his feet and wondering whether the bread is stale because the baker hated him personally or hated everyone equally. Both perspectives belong to the same army. Medieval warfare contains romance literature and trench mud in equal quantities, though not always in equal proportions. The men who return from campaign remember cold nights, wet gear, sore shoulders, bad ale, and sudden fear just as clearly as they remember charge or triumph. The wind shifts and brings the smell of horses more strongly. In the picket line, grooms work constantly. They curry coats, check hooves, examine tack, and guard precious animals from theft, injury, and panic. Horses are expensive, vulnerable, and essential. A warhorse is not simply transport. It is capital with a temper. You run a hand along the neck of one bay animal and feel the heat beneath the hair, the twitch of muscle, the sleekness interrupted by scars old and new. Its ears flick back at a nearby clatter. Its patience with war appears limited. A quirky detail emerges from the baggage train. A captain's small dog has somehow joined the march and now struts through camp with scandalous confidence, stealing scraps and choosing sleeping places based entirely on ranklessness. Animals accompanied armies more often than romantic art admits. Dogs, horses, mules, hawks, and a host of less welcome creatures shared military spaces. Camps had their own ecosystems of fleas, rats, crows, and opportunists. No matter how solemn the campaign, some dog somewhere was still making off with a piece of somebody's dinner. When battle finally comes, it begins less like thunder than like tension being wound too tight. Men take position, orders move down the line, voices drop, armour buckles are checked one last time. The taste in your mouth goes dry despite the cool air. Across the field, banners stir above distant movement. You hear the creak of bows drawn, the stamping of horses, the clatter of harness, and somewhere the small absurd sound of a man clearing his throat, because bodies insist on ordinary functions even on extraordinary mornings. The ground is soft from recent rain. Mud clings to boots. Every step threatens to slip. Then the arrows go. The sky seems suddenly full of motion. Black shafts rising and falling in terrible swarms. They hiss. They rattle against armour. They strike earth with hard, wet sounds. Men duck without dignity because dignity has become a luxury item. Horses rear. Commands are shouted and partly lost. The smell of churned mud mixes with sweat, leather, and the metallic edge of violence. It is confusion arranged into lines. It is noise so complete that certain details become strangely sharp. One dropped glove, one snapped shaft, one man staring at his own hand as if surprised to still possess it. Battles are not long discussions. They are collisions of preparation, terrain, courage, fear, and accident. Historians still argue over the exact sequence of events in many famous engagements. Because chroniclers are biased, witnesses are limited, and memory after terror behaves badly. That uncertainty matters. Medieval battle narratives often pretend to clarity after the fact, but real combat is thick with dust, shouting, obscured vision, and people who do not see the whole field. Certainty is usually written by those no longer being shot at. When the line breaks, the moment is felt before it is understood. A ripple of movement, a cluster pulling back, someone shouting to stand fast, another already running. Collapse in battle can arrive almost as a mood, a collective realization that the shape-holding danger at bay has given way. You move with a group toward a hedge boundary where infantry attempt to reform. A captain with mud on his face and blood on one sleeve is still bellowing orders with magnificent disbelief that anyone might ignore him. Near him, an archer draws and shoots until his fingers look raw enough to light through. War abroad is only part of the story. England also knows civil conflict, and civil conflict cuts differently because the enemy speaks your language, recognizes your saints, and may even be related to someone at your supper table. In the 15th century, the Wars of the Roses pit rival dynastic houses and their supporters against one another in a series of struggles for the throne. The symbols of red and white roses become famous later, though the lived reality was more tangled than tidy emblem and schoolbook summary. Magnas shifted allegiance. Kings were deposed and restored. Battlefields multiplied. The crown itself seemed less like a fixed object than a dangerous chair everyone wanted and almost nobody could sit in safely. You enter a noble household touched by this later instability and feel how politics has seeped into domestic life. Servants lower their voices when certain names are mentioned. A lady supervises letters being sealed for allies whose loyalty may be temporary. Retainers gather in the yard for inspection, wearing badges that mark affiliation and invite trouble. The smell here is of horses, wax, stew, and apprehension. Civil war turns houses into headquarters, and family networks into chains of risk. One marriage can become strategy. One dinner invitation can become surveillance with table linens. A messenger arrives near dusk with news from another county. His horse is foam-flecked. His cloak is soaked at the hem. He speaks quickly, and the room tightens around each phrase. A town has opened its gates. A lord has changed sides. Another has been taken. The kind of information that reorders loyalties before the candles burn halfway down. Medieval political life can pivot on such moments. Written letters matter, but so do speed, rumour, and who believes which version first. Inside the hall, supper is eaten with more force than conversation. Bread is torn, cups are drained. No one comments on the stew. A minstrel has been sent away because music would feel almost insulting to the mood. On the wall hangs a shield painted with a lineage older than anyone now living beneath it. Yet lineage itself no longer guarantees security. That is the peculiar ache of dynastic conflict. The very families built to anchor the realm begin pulling it apart. The scholarship around these wars remains lively because motives were mixed and memory later grew highly partisan. Were conflicts driven chiefly by personal ambition, failures of kingship, regional affinities, bastard feudal ties, economic strain, or long-accumulated aristocratic grievance? Historians continue to weigh the balance differently. The reality likely lies in the way these causes combined. A weak ruler, strong magnates, contested succession, household networks, and private military followings make a combustible mixture. England, like many kingdoms, sometimes discovers that noble honour can behave a lot like kindling. Night settles over the camp and the hall alike. Outside, the watch moves between pools of torchlight. Mail is hung to dry, boughs are unstrung. Horses crop hay with the slow satisfaction of creatures thankfully uninterested in dynastic principle. The ground exhales the day's damp. Smoke drifts low across the yard and settles in cloth and hair. Men who fought speak very little, which tells you more than any speech could. Those who did not fight talk too much, which tells you something else. You lie down at last beneath rough wool with the smell of leather and ashes still in your nose. In the distance an owl calls from dark trees. Closer by, someone snores with the complete innocence of exhaustion. Somewhere a clerk is still writing by candlelight, turning fear and confusion into records future generations will call evidence. Somewhere a widow waits for news. Somewhere a king dreams of victory while his subjects count the cost in coin, labour, and names. This is medieval England under arms, where longbows hum, banners shift in wet wind, and crowns are never as secure as they look from below. You have felt the mud of the march, the tightness before battle, the sting of camp smoke, the heavy warmth of horse flesh, the strange blend of honour and hunger that fills an army on campaign. War here is not a clean story of heroes and villains. It is a hard pressure laid across the realm, shaping taxes, loyalties, memory, and grief. And as darkness closes over field and fortress, the weapons rest only for a little while, waiting for the next command to wake them. You travel with pilgrims at first light, when the road is still silvered with dew and the world feels half awake. The air is cool on your face and smells of wet grass, trampled earth, and the faint sweetness of wood smoke drifting from cottages not yet fully stirred. Ahead of you, the road bends between hedges and open fields, then disappears into a pale distance where church towers and bare trees rise like quiet markers. Around you walk people of many sorts, boots darkened by damp, cloaks gathered close, staffs tapping the ground in a slow shared rhythm that sounds almost like thought itself. Pilgrimage changes the road, a road used by farmers, merchants, messengers, and drovers becomes something softer and stranger when pilgrims fill it. They carry not only bundles and purses, but intentions. One seeks healing for a bad leg. Another travels in thanks for surviving a fever. A widow goes to pray for her husband. A young man claims he is making the journey for devotion, though the way he keeps glancing toward a lively girl in a blue hood suggests devotion may have company. Medieval England is crossed by such travellers, moving toward shrines, great and small, toward cathedrals, saints' tombs, relics, wells, and chapels believed to stand a little closer to grace, the sound of their movement is gentle but constant. Leather creaks. A buckle knocks against a staff. Someone coughs. Someone hums a hymn under their breath and forgets half the words. A mule snorts with deep skepticism about holiness. The road underfoot is rutted, drying at the edges where the sun reaches it first, still soft in the middle where cartwheels have churned it. Dust will rise later. For now, damp earth clings lightly to hems and soles, and every step carries the faint coolness of morning upward through your body. You walk beside an older woman whose cloak smells of lavender and sheep wool. She fingers a string of beads and tells you, in the tone of someone stating plain fact, that St. Thomas has helped her neighbour's son recover speech after an illness. Perhaps he did. Perhaps the boy simply improved. Medieval pilgrimage lives in that space where certainty, hope, story, and lived experience all meet. Shrines matter because people believe they matter, and belief itself travels far on tired feet. Canterbury is the great destination in many imaginations, especially after the martyrdom of Thomas Becket in 1170, transformed his shrine into one of Europe's most famous pilgrimage sites. Pilgrims also journey to Walsingham, Glastonbury, local saints' tombs, healing wells, and countless parish devotions rooted deeply in place. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Pilgrimage was a major feature of religious life in medieval England, supported by shrines, relic cults, hospitality networks, and an economy of offerings, souvenirs, lodging, and memory. The sacred had roots, and those roots had inns. By noon you reach one of them. The inn yard is lively with chickens, carts, a tethered horse swatting flies, and a boy hauling water with all the theatrical suffering youth can muster. Inside, the common room smells gloriously of stew, ale, damp cloaks steaming near the hearth, and rushes that have seen better days. Pilgrims remove hats, flex stiff shoulders, and settle onto benches polished by years of use. The place hums with talk, news from a distant town, word of a bridge repair, rumours about taxes, a story of miraculous healing that improves slightly with each retelling. Travel in medieval England is slow enough to encourage storytelling. When roads are long and evenings dark, tales become a kind of currency. A knight may tell of a siege, a merchant recounts a ship nearly lost in foul weather, a priest offers an exemplum about pride punished or charity rewarded, a miller tells something rude enough to make 3 people laugh, 2 cross themselves, and 1 widow snort ale through her nose. Human beings do not become solemn simply because history later takes notes about them. The fire crackles and settles. You feel its warmth against your shins while your back remains cool from a draught creeping under the door. A bowl of stew arrives, thick with beans, onions, cabbage, and a little meat strong enough to flavour the pot. The spoon is wooden and slightly rough at the edge where long use has worn it unevenly. The taste is plain and filling. Beside it comes bread, dense enough to demand respect from your jaw. The ale is mild and cloudy. After the road, it feels perfect. In the corner, a travelling musician tunes a small fiddle while an apprentice from the kitchen watches with open devotion. Minstrels, storytellers, jugglers, and wandering entertainers move through medieval life more often than rigid stereotypes allow. They bring music, gossip, satire, romance, and news with a memorable rhythm. Not every tale is noble. Many are comic, sly, earthy, or morally flexible in exactly the way ordinary listeners tend to enjoy. A long winter evening improves considerably when somebody knows a story about a foolish reeve and a very determined goose. You leave the road later and spend an evening in a manor household where winter has driven everyone inward. Outside, the fields lie dark and stiff beneath a hard sky. The air smells of frost, smoke, and distant river water. Inside the hall, firelight throws amber across beams blackened by years of soot. Wool hangings soften the walls a little. Hounds sleep nose to tail near the hearth. The hall smells of roast onions, rushes, tallow, and wet cloaks drying from pegs. This is storytelling weather, the kind that turns a room into a world. A servant girl spins by the fire, fingers moving almost without thought. An old retainer sharpens a knife and listens with one eye half closed. A lady embroiders a border of vines and tiny birds onto a cloth while pretending not to pay close attention. Then someone begins a tale and the whole room shifts toward it. The voice is measured, easy, deliberate. No stage, no manuscript, just memory carried in sound. Stories in medieval England move through many channels. Clergy preach moral exemplar. Nobles hear romances of Arthur, Charlemagne, Troy, and Alexander. Villagers share local legends of spirits, saints, tricksters, and impossible events that definitely happened to somebody's cousin near the marsh. Ballads circulate. Chronicles are read aloud. Proverbs are repeated. Riddles amuse. Tales at hearthside help pass the dark hours. But they also shape what people think the world contains: holiness, justice, danger, treachery, wonder, talking animals if the teller is in the mood. A quirky little fact peeks through the firelight here. Medieval households often loved riddles and verbal games, and some surviving collections preserve a delight in playful description that is at once clever and faintly mischievous. People enjoyed being puzzled, teased, and made to think sideways. The medieval mind was not all doom and incense. It could be delightfully fond of wordplay, especially when accompanied by drink and an appreciative audience. You're invited into the women's side of household labour for a while, not separated by a wall perhaps, but by rhythm and task. Here the sounds are quieter, the rasp of flax, the soft pull of thread, the snip of shears, the rustle of linen folded and refolded. Social history lives here as much as anywhere, in ordinary skilled work that fills the hours of servants, wives, daughters, widows, and hired helpers. Cloth does not make itself. Clothes do not mend themselves. Bedding, table linen, shirts, caps, and towels all pass through hands too often ignored in grand narratives. The fabric against your fingers tells its own history. Fine linen is cool and smooth. Coarse wool scratches slightly and holds warmth. A pile of undyed yarn smells faintly of lanolin and storage chests. A woman demonstrates carding and spinning with an ease so complete it seems like breathing. Conversation threads through the work. Who is ill? Who may marry? Which lord is difficult? Whether the frost will kill the early greens. Women often carry and exchange local memory through such spaces. Not in formal chronicles, perhaps, but in the durable record of repeated speech. Children listen too, even when pretending not to. A boy lies on his stomach near the fire, tracing patterns in rushes with one finger. A girl leans against a stool and mouths lines from a tale she has clearly heard before. This is how culture settles into the next generation, by repetition and atmosphere, more than instruction alone. You do not need to be literate to inherit a world of narrative. You need ears, time, and adults willing to talk once the labour of the day loosens its grip. Religion remains woven through these evenings. A saint's day brings special food if possible, perhaps a little better ale, perhaps music, perhaps a local custom everyone insists is ancient whether or not it is. At bedtime prayers are spoken, a charm may be muttered over a sick child, a candle burns before a small image or cross. Sacred time and household time mingle naturally. One does not replace the other. They overlap, each giving shape to the week and year. You spend another day in a village where winter has shortened labour and lengthened memory. Smoke hangs low over roofs. Mud near the byre has frozen hard enough to crunch underfoot. The smell of cabbage, peat, and livestock fills the lane. Inside one cottage, neighbours gather because an elderly man has decided he remembers exactly how the old church looked before the last repairs, and because nobody is certain he is wrong. Oral memory matters intensely in a society where not everything is written down, and what is written is not always available to those who need it. Who held which strip of land? Where the boundary stone stood? Which family once owed geese at Martinmas? Stories preserve rights as well as amusement. This is also a world alive with folklore, not separate from religion, not fully opposed to it, but entangled with it in daily thought. A woman avoids drawing water after dark from a certain spring because lights are sometimes seen there. A shepherd swears that a mound in the next field hums on Midsummer Eve. A child is warned not to wander where the lane meets the wood because troublesome beings like crossroads, fairies, ghosts, restless dead, omens in bird calls, warnings in dreams, luck attached to certain days, all these circulate in speech and custom. Historians still argue about how deeply such beliefs were held and how consistently they were understood across regions and classes. The evidence is patchy, filtered, and often recorded by hostile or amused observers. Yet the persistence of these traces suggests a richly peopled imagination. At supper, one man insists that a corpse candle once drifted over the marsh before his cousin died. Another replies that his cousin would have died anyway because he ate eels in Lent without sufficient caution. This is how belief often lives, half earnest, half debated, woven into humour. People can fear an omen and laugh at it in the same evening. The supernatural in medieval life is rarely a separate category. It sits beside weather lore, saints' legends, practical caution, and the general sense that the world contains more agency than the eye can account for. A book appears after dinner in a wealthier household, and for a while the spoken and written worlds meet. The manuscript is richly bound, its pages creamy in the firelight. A clerk reads aloud from a romance of chivalry and marvel. The listeners sigh at noble devotion, scoff at impossible distances, and lean in all the same. Reading aloud matters enormously. Texts reach beyond the literate few through voice. A poem, a saint's life, a chronicle entry, a legal notice, all may become communal experience when one person reads and others listen. Literacy is powerful, so is listening. You notice too how humour helps carry difficulty. Servants mock masters in whispers. Husbands and wives trade dry comments over burnt bread. Travellers exaggerate discomfort until it becomes comedy. A parish priest tells a tale against vanity with such sly detail that the whole room knows exactly which local family inspired it. Gentle sarcasm is not modern, it is timeless. Medieval people were perfectly capable of eyeing pretension and muttering something memorable under their breath. As night deepens, the sounds narrow, the wind rubs at the shutters. Fire settles into a red glow. One by one, tasks end. A spindle is set aside. A cup is emptied. A child is carried half asleep to a truckle bed. The room smells now of embers, wool, old wood, and the day's last food. You feel the heat on your hands and the cool at your shoulders where the hall opens toward darker corners. Outside there is frost, owl song, and a lane gone silver beneath moonlight. This is medieval England in its inner life. On the road to shrines, by the hearth in winter, in the stories people tell to make sense of danger, hope, boredom, faith, and one another. You have walked among pilgrims with sore feet and strong intentions. You have heard tales rise above stew and ale. You have felt linen and wool in women's workrooms, listened to children inherit a world through repetition, and watched folklore sit comfortably beside prayer. History here is not only in courts, battlefields, and charters, it is in voices after sunset, in remembered jokes, in beliefs carried from cottage to inn and back again. And as the fire burns lower and the last story softens into drowsy silence, the whole room seems to drift onwards toward sleep. Morning arrives with a pale gold light spread thinly across the roofs, the fields, and the worn stone of the church tower. The air is cool enough to sting your nose when you step outside, and it carries a familiar mix of smells that now seem to belong entirely to this land. Damp earth, wood smoke, hay, wool, a faint trace of river mist, yet something in the atmosphere has shifted, not vanished, not broken, simply loosened, as if the old medieval world still stands all around you but no longer fits itself with quite the same certainty. You walk along a lane where ruts have dried hard after rain, and the houses on either side look much as they have for generations. Thatched roofs, timber frames, low doors, pigs rooting with complete confidence in their right to be inconvenient. A woman shakes crumbs from a cloth, a boy carries kindling. A smith begins his day with the first iron stroke against the anvil. The sound rings out bright and sharp. Life continues, as it always does. But beneath the ordinary labour there is a new feeling. difficult to name at first. People still live by season, parish, custom, and rent. Yet the arrangement seems less fixed in heaven than it once did. The later 15th century in England has this quality of old forms and new pressures pressing against one another. Lords remain powerful, kings still claim sacred majesty, parish life still orders the year with feasts, fasts, saints, bells, and processions. Yet war, plague, social change, commercial growth, literacy, and political instability have all worked on the kingdom like water on stone. The edges are changing shape. No trumpet announces it. 1,000 small adjustments do. You head toward a market town and notice first how busy the road has become. More carts, more pack horses, more people carrying goods to sell, hire out, or exchange. A pair of drovers urge sheep onward in a soft white cluster that smells faintly of lanolin and wet field. A merchant servant rides past with a leather satchel tied tight against his side. The road is not smooth, it never is. Yet it feels more connected now, more aware of distant places. Towns matter more than ever. Trade matters more than ever. Money talks more loudly in daily life, and many people who would once have thought chiefly in custom now think also in opportunity. You enter the town at mid-morning. Bells sound above the rooftops, but the market below has a rhythm all its own. The square is full of stalls, cloth, barrels, baskets, and voices testing the limits of human patience. The smell is thick with onions, fresh bread, leather, horse dung, wood smoke, and damp stone warmed by the climbing sun. A goldsmith peers through narrowed eyes at a small piece of work held near the window light. A mercer unfolds imported fabric with the care of a priest handling relics. A stationer offers paper, parchment, ink, and books, and that last detail matters. Books are still costly, but writing has begun to spread more widely through urban and official life. Clerks multiply, records multiply, merchants keep accounts, households preserve letters, legal habits deepen. The written word has long carried authority in medieval England, but now its reach broadens in practical ways. The smell of parchment and ink belongs not only to monasteries and royal offices, it lives in shops, guild halls, and counting houses too. Memory is increasingly assisted by marks on a page, and that changes how people argue, trade, inherit, and govern. A mainstream historical fact settles here with quiet importance. In 1476, William Caxton introduced the first printing press to England. Manuscript culture did not suddenly vanish, and reading remained unequal and limited. But print began to alter the circulation of texts in powerful ways. The shift was gradual rather than magical. No one wakes up one morning and declares that the medieval mind has been replaced. Still, the arrival of print is one of those developments that reveals how the old world is beginning to tilt towards something recognizably different. You stop near a bookseller's table where a small printed text sits beside handwritten ones. The printed page looks crisp, regular, almost unnervingly even. A scribe's page has the warmth of the human hand in it, slight variation, careful curves, tiny flaws that make it alive. The printed page has its own beauty, cooler and steadier. You touch the edge of the paper and feel its dryness beneath your fingers. Nearby, a schoolboy recites grammar with the sorrowful determination of youth everywhere. Learning is still hard work, but it is no longer held only in the same old containers. Religious life remains everywhere, yet it too has become complicated by habit, wealth, anxiety, and criticism. You enter a parish church where sunlight falls through coloured glass and pools across the stone floor in red and blue patches. The air smells of wax, incense, old wood, and damp winter cloak. A woman kneels before a side altar, murmuring prayers for the dead. A gilt candle burns nearby. A painted saint looks down through years of smoke darkening. Everything feels enduring. Yet there are already quiet murmurs in some circles about clerical worldliness, uneven standards among priests, the cost of masses and offerings, and the difference between outward religion and inward conviction This is not yet the age of open religious break, but the groundwork for dissatisfaction has long existed. The church remains central, powerful, and beloved in many ways. Parish festivals, guild devotions, processions, chantries, and pilgrimages still help structure emotional and communal life. At the same time, criticism of corruption, absentee clergy, and institutional wealth appears in sermons, satire, and reforming voices. Medieval religion is not fading from lack of importance. It is being scrutinised precisely because it matters so much. Outside the church, you pass a school attached to a religious foundation, where boys chant from their lessons and the sound spills through the open doorway into the street. Literacy grows slowly, unevenly, but meaningfully among urban men especially. And in certain noble and mercantile households, women too are increasingly involved with written correspondence and devotional reading. A mother may oversee accounts. A merchant may instruct his son in numeracy as well as trade. A noblewoman may commission books and manage estates through letters. The world is still hierarchical, still deeply unequal, but it is more text-aware than it used to be. You leave the town and travel through the countryside where the shape of landholding is shifting. Some former domain fields have been leased rather than directly managed. Pasture expands in places. Sheep graze where grain once dominated. Hedges mark spaces that feel more private than older open field habits would have preferred. The wind moves through the grass with a dry whisper. Sheep lift their heads, chew, and return to the serious business of being economically transformative. Wool continues to matter enormously, and the balance between tillage and pasture has social consequences. What enriches one landholder may displace one tenant. Economic change is rarely rude enough to announce itself as injustice. It simply rearranges the ground beneath people's feet. You speak with a copyholder who knows exactly what customs protect him, and exactly how fragile those customs may prove if a lord sees profit elsewhere. He smells of hay, sweat, and smoke, with mud dried at the hem of his tunic. His hands are cracked from work. He is no passive relic of an old order. He bargains, remembers, resents, and watches. This is one of the truths of late medieval England. Ordinary people are more legally aware, more economically alert, and often more assertive than old stereotypes suggest. They may not write treatises, but they understand terms, dues, and advantages remarkably well. A curious tidbit surfaces in a manor house, where a young gentleman practices dancing steps in a chamber, while also having one eye on a newly fashionable mirror imported at great expense. The mirror is not especially large, but he consults it with the devotion of a man convinced his sleeve angle may affect his destiny. Late medieval elite life contains increasing concern with display, manners, household refinement, and worldly polish. Sumptuary laws try, often with limited success, to control who may wear what, fabric, fur, colour, and cut all speak loudly about rank. Human vanity, however, has always been more inventive than legislation. At court, the fragility of power is now unmistakable. The Wars of the Roses have shown that a king may be crowned, challenged, displaced, restored, and buried with unnerving speed. Noble affinities still matter, household badges still matter, marriage alliances still matter, yet there is also a growing hunger for order after decades of uncertainty. When Henry Tudor defeats Richard III at Bosworth in 1485 and becomes Henry VII, the moment is later treated as a convenient turning point. In truth, continuity and change coexist. England does not wake up medieval on one day and early modern on the next. But Bosworth does matter as a political landmark, ending one phase of dynastic conflict and beginning a monarchy determined to tighten control carefully and persistently. You stand in a hall where the atmosphere feels different from older, more sprawling aristocratic turbulence. The king's servants move with deliberate caution. Accounts are checked. Access is managed. Favour still matters, of course, but so does efficiency. The smell of wax and fresh rushes mingles with roasted meat and the faint dry scent of parchment. Clerks seem abundant. Chamber politics remain intense. Yet the tone has shifted toward calculation rather than constant noble improvisation. A crown battered by civil war learns to love records, revenue, and caution. Scholars still argue over how sharp the break really was between the medieval and the early Tudor worlds. Some emphasise continuity in local society, religion, legal culture, and daily life. Others highlight centralising monarchy, changing finances, humanist influence, print culture, and altered noble politics. Both views contain truth. Historical periods are tidy only in hindsight. The people living through them do not hear chapter headings. They hear church bells, market cries, tax demands, and gossip about who currently has the king's ear. In a noble household, you find old habits and new ambitions sitting side by side at supper. The hall still glows with firelight, hounds still sleep under benches, bread is still torn by hand, yet tableware is finer. Manners are more consciously staged, imported goods appear with greater frequency. A lute sounds from the corner, and a young woman reads from a devotional text with clear, practiced fluency. Nearby, a steward reviews expenses with a severity that suggests the household is trying to appear grand while surviving arithmetic. That, too, feels transitional. Splendour and bookkeeping become close companions. You move into the evening streets of London, the greatest city in the realm, where all these developments seem to gather more densely. The smell of the city is impossible to ignore. River mud, smoke, ale, fish, leather, humanity. The streets are crowded even late, and the riverfront remains active with cargo and labour. Barges slide through dark water under torchlight. Warehouses loom. Church towers rise above the roofs. Inns shelter travellers from every county. Here the kingdom feels less like a patchwork of local worlds and more like a realm tied together by law, commerce, and administration. Not united neatly, never neatly, but more closely bound. At Paul's Cross, sermons can address large urban crowds. In inns and halls, political rumours spread fast. In workshops, craftsmen look beyond local demand toward broader markets. In official chambers, documents move between city and shire with increasing regularity. London is not the future in any simple sense, yet it shows how medieval England has become something larger, busier, and more tightly connected than the countryside alone could reveal. As dusk falls, you leave the city behind and find yourself once more on quieter ground. A church bell sounds across fields going grey in the evening. Rooks settle black against the sky. Smoke rises in straight lines from village roofs. The scent of wood smoke is soft now, almost sweet. Children are called indoors. A dog circles twice and settles by a doorway. In the fading light, the old England still seems complete in itself. Parish, manor, market, and season still order life with ancient confidence. And yet the details keep speaking. A printed page in a town shop, a leased field where labour service once dominated, a cautious new dynasty measuring power through finances and control, a noble household reading aloud from books more accessible than before, merchants with wider ambitions, villagers more alert to legal wording, priests still central, but no longer beyond criticism. None of this abolishes the medieval world. It merely loosens it, thread by thread, until the fabric begins to take on a different shape. Night deepens. The sky clears. Frost silver touches the grass. You return to a household settling for sleep. The last bowl is washed. The fire burns lower. Someone folds a cloak and sets it near the bed for morning. The room smells of embers, wool, rushes, and the last warmth of supper. A candle gutters and steadies. You can feel the roughness of the blanket as you draw it close, the welcome weight of it against the chill. The voices around you soften. They speak of rents, a wedding, a rumour from court, a saint's day approaching, a boy who may be sent to town for training, a daughter who reads well, a neighbour disputing a boundary hedge, a new book seen in the market, a sermon sharply critical of local excess. Nothing in these words sounds like the end of an age. That is how ages usually end. Quietly, through habits changing before anyone names the change. So you rest in this twilight of medieval England, where bells still mark the hours, where candles still flicker before saints, where wool still warms the body and mud still clings to the road, but where the old certainties have begun to soften at the edges. You lie beneath timber beams dark with years of smoke, listening to the wind touch the eaves and the low, settling sounds of a household surrendering to night. The kingdom around you is not disappearing. It is drifting, slowly and almost tenderly, toward another shape. Now the room grows calmer still. The fire no longer leaps, only glows. The red embers breathe gently in the hearth, brightening and dimming like a sleeping heart. Outside, the fields lie quiet beneath the cold stars. The church tower stands unmoving in the dark. Somewhere beyond it, roads lead toward towns, courts, ports, and printing presses. Somewhere nearer, a sheep shifts in its pen, and a shutter taps softly once in the wind. You let those sounds grow distant. The wool at your chin is warm. The straw beneath the mattress rustles very slightly when you settle. A last thread of smoke lingers in the air, mixed with beeswax and the faint clean scent of frost. Everything feels slower now, softer. The names of kings, battles, laws, and quarrels begin to fade, leaving only the deeper rhythm beneath them all, the rhythm of bells, footsteps, breathing, weather, and sleep. You picture the land at rest, villages tucked under darkness, rivers moving quietly between their banks, castle walls standing silent, market squares emptied of shouting, abbey stones cooling under moonlight, roads silvered by dew. Above them all, the same wide night stretching from field to town, from manor to monastery, from the poorest cottage to the highest hall. And in that great stillness, medieval England becomes less a hard place of struggle and power, and more a vast sleeping landscape of firelight, wool, prayer, and memory. The world grows dimmer. The air grows colder beyond the blanket, warmer within it. Your thoughts drift more lightly now, as if they too are following a lantern down a lane and then letting it go. The bells will ring again in the morning, but not yet. For now, the kingdom is quiet, and so are you.